O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit for all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the
Minihitat minihitak una okane una kauklek kallang nektok 19th me legislwane akapivik pang me katimaroti na hibonyoktit ilokata tay na inyun na tamat kot ilitsukanya ahluit ilitsukanya tot inyugek tugud ubagut tauchikuni na tamat kot pigu mangilit kibutin na ikakakluguman na taulugu nunak pakput pigu mangit kikput naptauk tauchikuni na wagut katimakapta hibunniyo kapta tamat koi isumagirakai mibut tabalu tamat koptak na tabut tikitabut na tabut tabaratay nakota ataw chikun tay na tinagalan tabaraptak unay ukalaw dilaw huhi ilitsakila ko huhi kanok tamat ko din na waptigo ni na katimakapta hibunniyo kapta o kakapta tamat ko hibunniyo tit hibulek tibut na ukaktut tabalud huamahiu kuting taman na kawamat uwagut kawamauruagut huamahiu kuta ukaktut tau chiminyap tayo kada pigu malay kibut tamat kodin nalo alat nani inyuniaktuat ukualo tabar pigu mangit kibut matkot na tamak taktuat akanayat tokotak na tokotaurat inyuek tut tamakoting nagaluni ay mabingi na piek takoting tabalu una pigu malay kibut matkot na ikakakalugaman na tabra ilitsukanya kaptay na ilitsukaragu tamat kuninga tay nalo tabra kanikun una ilitsukakrakput pigu manang kikput una luptauk tabra wani akapi rawagut na tauchikuni ukakapta tamat kot hibunakiraki matkot akanayatin na tamak taktot nagaluni tokoti taktot ukiutkek tabra tay na tamat koti na hibunakiraki butut khingyaklu taman na tamat kot akanayatin na akanalo piyakhola vluting taymak taktot tabra tamanip tauk mani tamat tuma apkotakpam apkotinga tabalut tam na ichumagilit kikput Inuvium namitsarvinga tam na habaw takanyalit kikputukiupak umani ang maktapting ni tamat ko tabray kayo kanalit kibut nalo kanok tutrik kanalit kibut tabralo taok NWT mi tamar tawag tamat ingmigtiun kaba makakanertot ikayo ne akawibut ikayo ne akilikibut tabar kanolo tamat ko di na malakotalengit malakotalengit mani wagut kaba mauwagut itkagiliikibut tait na ingmigtiunli kaba makakanertot ukakti tabra ukuat nalunairipiaribut kanolo tamanna annearon puvaklaronak maanittuaq tabra tamattuma patsakkartit pailit kaatigutukiuppak malorongniukiungni tabra taitna patsakkartit kaatigut maani na ataramik taitna ublutuaq naagalaunni ukuyuttuaq taitna atingailiinman allangortarlugu tamattuma tabralo ukuat matkuatit na havaktuat maani na tutrikkainiaqoting nunaptingni tutrikkainiaqanting nunaptingnik tabralo taitna wagut kaba mauruagut upani qappilauruagut hivunniortauruagut tamatko tabra taitna isummatiginialigitkiga ilihimaniaqalugu qanortilaakrangit tamatko quyanarpak una ilihartuani ulupak wani kabealaani katoqqiligitsut inuit tamatkuat itqagibliugit Nova Scotia miittuat tabraptaortaamna angun na piarluktaumman taitnaqoting piarluktauliginman tabra taitnaqoting tabra taavani tabra taitna tamatkuninga atuliligitsut inuit iloqa ataullugi ikaaqqaarlugumanna nunakput tabra taitna atuliligitsut taitna hinik kabealaanik atuligitsut iloqating tabraptauq na ikayuo niaqlugit atautsикун икаёрниаррута на кихимериортуартуатунит иннеринман табралу иньюиттайна қиламик итна табра таматкуатитна таитнараармата илитсорилертуни қиламик табра taitna isumal tamatkuatinna piaqpalaitkait nalo anniarlugit pilaitkait qilamik nailitsorilirtuni covid tabrani puvaklornim tabra taitna Inuvialuktuatinna hapiqlartitkait tabraptauqinna tabraluptauq taitna qanoqqa tama na illuatun iñukuna iñuk ikayorniartuni ilumun ikayorniartuni ikayornartoq tabraukuat uqaqti tabraptauq taitna tamattuma inna piarluktaqartut unni taitna itkaluaqquting tabra tamanna piarluktaqanaqi inna ikayullagikput atautsikunitna oqautigiguptigunaagaluuni atautsikunitna katutigupta tamanna piillagikput tabra iloqala taitnaittukraugaluartugut quyanaqoqarti here over South Main quyanaqoqarti tabrauna quyaiga malrungni ukiungni tabrailihimarugutaman tuma puvaklornim hapeqlartitakkangatigut Tabralo tay na nutakakay na pilyaw tangikay. Tamat ko alo ika na habak tita ataw chikuni na habak to ako rot. Pilyaw tangiligit kahit pilyaw tangakalugit. Tabralo nilangit tao ka ay mabingmingin ablak takoting.
Or not being able to feed one's family due to loss of employment is affecting one's self-worth. Loss of one's business is causing depression. Limited access to acute healthcare services are costing lives. All of this leading to further anxiety, fear, uncertainty, stress, and sometimes loss of life. Madam Speaker, we may be turning the page on the physical harm caused by the virus, and it is now time to focus on the healing aspect by managing the mental health damage caused by the virus, pandemic lockdowns, and restrictions. Reviewing information on both sides of the debate, my understanding is that there is an unknown when we talk about how the pandemic has impacted one's mental health. We see words being used that include post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, stress, irritation, frustration.
Tamat ko na pilyaw tangikay. Inuit nutakakit nagaluni tamani inyuni aktot ilihimagibut tamat tumapuwak lang tamat ko alo ikayo ini aktot na isumaktonik. Tay na tamat tumain na ikayo roti na pilyaw tangiligit kahit ikayo ini aktot pilyaw tangiligit kahit hapekrak titakalugit.
On us in a territory with many small, have-not, and isolated communities. Madam Speaker, people of the Northwest Territories will be looking for a plan from this government to address those health issues that have arisen due to the pandemic, and more specifically,
Ikayok ti siyaming niyukot, ibaklar niya lichut, inuit, ikakaklo man na, habagtot, igmiktigun, nagalunin, matkodit na isumaktot, isumangitin na, natkilayar kangit, tabertap ko ng kabamauroanin, ikayok ti siyaming niyuk, ibaklar lichut, kuya nakpak. Tabra una, uba nga nunakpun min amale guru nga. Tabraw na tabrap tawak inyugek tuat inyuit na igiluilyok tuat 25% dun. Tabertay na ataw chikunin na inyunek tuakalwak tut. Agalan hapekarapiak tutin na igluilyo kotin. Kanakolo tamat kotin na nutagurot inuit tamat kotin na tamat koptak miyaka nutakaratin na ilan ni nutakangit ilangita nagalunin nutakangita ilangit nutakarangit na ingmingnik ikayo na utirakagay. Tabralo tayo naptak tamat kot igilungit natutkikakanakalawakagay. Tabraw tayo na mani nunakput mikian inaritsak taman na igiluilyok tot ilihimagibut inyugek tot igiluilyok tot tamat kot tabar tayo na namun tukukralyo kaming tukukralyo ni ngat una hapekrakanak kiraktok ikayo tita taman na tutkikan tabar tam na ang igalawaktok taw chikunin na habaw tayo kayuptiyo taman na nugupaya ako pero takakalo nga tapos mga minisiamon frame like me Kuyanak.
As a member of the, I participated in a January 25th
January 25th me. Tabra ni kate makatawruanga. Nalo tamani na. Tamat ko atin na huaklo aluit. Huaklo aluit siya mo na ilimata. Na anak haron man na hapaklalakak tamat ko ikayuin yurakto tayo na tamat ko ni nga inyong nik nagalunin inyong nektoanik tamani habaktoani tayo na mani inyong nektot NWT me mani nunapting ni NWT me tamat ko di na tawdung nakirut nalo inyunekto tamani na hapaklalakaktot tamat ko ni nga tamat ko apta kakalik pangnik tayo na koting hilyagput man na huinyalihugat anak kakotikput hilya me anak kaon man na huinyalihugat inyugek pailuting tamat ko ni nga ilyakaraktot tamat ko aptak tayo na tabar tayo naptak tabar tayo na tamat ko di na ilyakagayt akiliakramik utin mun tabrunga kabamanon akiliakraligimik taksimin una langasawraktok tayo na tabra utak titakraw bluniptak tayo na tabraptak tabra ni tayo na katimakapta tuharagod matkuninga kanoklo tabra tamad na huaman kanok angalan na anak pitigo kuyanak okakte tabra na unaptak okakalang nelitiga tabra na mani nunapting ni NWT me tamat ko na apkotek pait okakalang neakit ka tabra lo tamat ko na apkotek pait mani nunapting ni tabra lo taman na okakalang nelin miga apkotek pag Dempster Highway magpitakayatan iktun tabra tayo na tamat ko na ikayo kubluit pigalwakit ka ubanga okakalang neakayotam na ang malang niya kaya ilitsakit kabuluit kanok kayo ka neaktilakran at type code. Tap ko tawak riglimi tamat alang tamat tuma apkotingati na apkotek pangit kalwak tilu tayo naptawak 2014 me taberta manin nunapting ni Northwest Territories ni.
Norman Wells. Moreover, since 2015, this project has been under environmental review by the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board. And to date, this review is still ongoing. Additionally, according to the Department of Infrastructure's website, since 2015, 40 of the 2042 bridges have been built, along with 2 access roads along the Mackenzie Highways route. Madam Speaker, even though I do not reside in nor am I from any of the communities along this highways route, as an NWT resident and leader, I consider this project a high priority for the NWT economy. In fact, as everyone in this House knows, this project is a priority for the 19th Assembly to pursue. Despite that fact, however, I'm beginning to be slightly concerned by the lack of progress I've heard on this project's progression during the life of this Assembly. I don't believe I heard one update from our Infrastructure Minister or Premier on the status of the Mackenzie Valley project. Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. The member seeking unanimous consent to complete her statement. Any nays? There are no nays. You may complete your statement.
In conclusion, Madam Speaker, I do not want this Assembly to forget about the Mackenzie Valley Highway project.
Tabalo tayo na isang matigilit kiga una kanok taman na apkotek pa apkon na ito atun apkon atun lahit kublugo tabar tayo naklunga ikayuti krangan ingakrok tunga pang mapak tabalo tayo na apakruta kanya kaya nugo kaya nako kakti. Great Slave me. Kaya nako kakti. February 7 me. Tamat ko at Sakpawani, Alberta me. Tayo na una ikayu tikrown. Isumak toanon matkuninga na tayo na tunagalan ikayok paura ka ikayu tak una ukperanyay chokoloni ikayo na utiblugit inuektot taber tentunukiyo ni tayo na ikayo ko niyo raklugit tam na tutkilyaligit ka taber tayo na tunagalan tuha na kiblugit man na ang maklugon tuhal lahiblugit inuit matkuninga ingming yun piyoktot ingming yun tayo maktaktot ingming yun tokoluting tabar tamat ko tayo na tamat ko di kayo di krangin inuek na tuha na kiligit chok na blo ikayo tekpak man na nakokopiakat tabalo tayo na tunagalan ang ayok kaguro atin na ikayo ulit tamat kuno nga ingming yun piyak na aktot isumagilugi tabalo tamat palihiman kolek toklugit pigalawakagay tabalo tayo na tunagalan tayo pingahuni ukini tabalo tayo na
the highest suicide rates in Canada. When will the NWT admit they're having our own mental health crisis? With incidents likely being much higher than reported, what is HSS doing to save our children? We have no residential trauma program, no residential treatment program for youth, no child and adolescent unit at Stanton, and the solution seems to be to ship vulnerable people off to another part of the country, causing further traumatization. If children are going to get better, they need wraparound support services in place where
Nutakatmat ko di kayo na tigit. Ilokata, ilihimata kano kayo na tislak ranginik. Kayo nakpak. Ma'am Freeman? Kayo nak tabraw na ukad lang nilikiya. Mani, Northwest Territories, me, NWT me. Tabraw ukwat na. Manin inyunektuat. Tabraw ukwat na pihuktang itnagalunin. Inyunek kaming kanok tutkiyutikrangat. Tabraw tayo na tunagalan kanok ukto kakagat kanok taman na inyunekanak nakutilanga. Unado tabraw tayo na inyugektot tayo na pangmapak imekun imilaw tamik imikraichut. Tabraw tam na tutkikakalakput isumatigilakput nagalunin o kakalakput na ang makalugo inyong nun tuhap kakrak Tabralutait na tauki na. Inuit na kiniktuakalabut na lo ikayo labut tamat ko ikayo kraming nik ivaklektuat. Klitcho mi iktuat tabrani inaurami tabratai na ilihakavingit na nagaling naktulunin na ang mukhimavailyu tingit na ilihangit na pilyotangit kahit ilihangit ikun. Tabra NWT mi mani nunapting ni tain na tabra inugektot na kanok ikayuti krangin tuhakanay chok. Tabra luptaok tain na tangong ichot inugektot sigagurut tangakahurut malutamat kotit na tabralutai na tunagilani na anyak tuwala kirini ataramik tabrani anyak tuwala kiriti na muna pabriu gakait na ikayok takaw kuting. Tabratai na inyugek tuwan ikubanga ingakruta kay matkoa mani Northwest Territories ni. Kanoklo tamat ko tay na. Tabratam na pihrota kanya kaya nugo munakrironin ikayo iniwak tuamot. Minihitaw rak. Kaya nak. Kaya knife Northmin. Kaya nak ko kakte. Ane akawit habagyanak. NWT mi. Talimani ubluni tabrani habakto naktukataramik habaktuni. Tabra NWT. Tabra tamat kotit na anyaktot ay magpataan niya ako ting akilyak kamawa ko alawakit katabra tam na o kakanyang niyakiga. Tait na tabra tait na nalo na anyakawit nagaluni isumakawit tabra tait na ay miwalarutin habagwingin. Tabra ilanip takin na
on small businesses, something our own Minister of Education, Culture and Employment has pointed out when I asked this previously. However, BC, in introducing its own paid sick leave legislation, found that many of those arguments were overblown. And in fact, businesses with paid sick leave
na tabra ingmitiwan habaligit na akililahurut na habang itaktonik. Tabra na mani nunapting ni tam na ilikinakirok. Iliyo tamat kotin na kaya nakakti apakaraw takakiro nga nugo. Come like me. Nakakti. Tabraw na ilihimagig puto na kanuto nagalan o kakahimagig putlo nagalunin dahil na hapakarak taktot tamat tumuna.
Canadians 15 or older who reported having a mental
Tabra tayo na ito nagalanin na ito 15 tunukiuligitin na hapakarapiak to tinyugek to tamani nunapting ni. Kano kayo ko niyak pitigit mani nunapting ni tayo na isumak to at nagalunin isumayak takto at tamat tumuna bubaklo ko ni na hapakarak titakangit nagalunin isumayak titakkangit. Tabralo tait na ikayo krepebu tabra tamatkot. Tabra okakte, tabra una, akaw lunga, akaw tsak lunga. Tabra tamat kuninga okakailaw ke. Tabralo tait na okakto ati nalo ilitsokep kainya yaktit. Na ilitsokep kaina yaktut tamat kuninga okakaming tamat naluruanun. Tabertait na ilihimagrugut tait na tunagalan habaktuat nalo taimak taralaichuat. Taberlo inyuhek okauchek kanakulu inyunearnek. Tabertamat kot isuma itkagit ka. Apekruutarillangin kitka taapkot tait na tunagalan kanutun ikayo rohulugit. Tabar tamat koptar ikayo irakrat ikayo tamat tait na pilyaw takhema itsuat na tamat na habaktuat nagalunin ikayo inyaktuat okaktuat ataramik tait na ikayo inyakirut pangmapakuyinak.
Statements. Member for Decho.
Madam Speaker.
Kuyinak okakte. Tabrona. Evelyn Krutko kakalang niyariga. Tabra Efi Krutko mun apanganulu tain sisamanik atara kaktok apia kaktok lo. Gordon tabra tok tamna taimakimamyok. Tabra Evelyn takpavani ilihak parak himarok ilihak kutsiktuani ilihakayak himarok kutsiktuanin. Taberlo tait na ingilakani na taut tait na habak parak himarok inyuwing mi habak himakakoni tabertamat kuningan Negarutilah kenyik nagaluni imakun tamat kot munakai matigit ikayu peakakigait na habag bigiragigait. Taberlo Fort Providence mun taberungan nutok. Tabraw na atanek pangokoni tabrani negarutinig munakriroanik nagaluni imakun nunakun tamat kot munakriroat. Tait nakoni tabrani habak paurak hemarok. Tabralo tait na isumalula itchok mat kuninga kekemik nagalunin hilamik isumalula itchok kekawgalawak tillu habak hemarok. Tabralo tait na tauk tabralo tait na kanutun nagalan ilitsokep kakait inyugek tuat kanak 32 tunikuni tabra habak himarok. Tabra tauk tamat kot inyugek tuat na nutakat haki raktuat tait na ikayak hemagait aulakak mata nagalunin ay marot. Evelyn tabra tamanip tauk nakinyaranik pukugaktok kinyaranik na kayautikran nginyik matkuat aulakak tuat tabunga hakirak mata. Tabralo tait na tunagalan tamna ikayo halugo ikayo rahalugo tabra tamna tait na aulalahip kaligit ka takpabunga ilihakayak talak lugo. 96, 97 me. Tabralo tait na tabra tait na hakak paktawanun ilaulahip kahalugo. Tabra Evelyn una tabre tayo na tunagalan tayo na tamat ko nung Hamlet akapiringin yun ilawra ako ni. Tabralo tayo na tun tamat ko din na ataw ko ni na kayo inyak to at inawala ni. Tabre kayo kimagaitok tabre tawa kakapiraw himamiyok. Tabre lo kata ablan pigo mangit po dili magipod Fort McPherson mi tabre lo tayo na tabre lo kainik tamat ko tayo na pilyaw tangit chohi umatipting nin isumagipigin. Tabre tayo na tabre tayo na matko tutok kanat na pinayak tut tabre tutok kanat kakaming pirak tut takpawang kay nakura mon anguniakan nemik anguniak to ani ilaw lahirok kaya nakpak.
Bernahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from the.
Kaya tam na Evelyn Kutko tabre tam na kaya pali kiya una tabre ta ko na Alberta mi 1935 mi kati marok tabre 14 nik nutakaki tukot ane joat tau chimi toat nutakaki jinna nukaki apiyaki nutaka ngitay na tunaglanin na ito. Tabraptak tay na tunaglan. Tamat ko na tabre ni hawak kimarak to hawak to tamani Patricia Rose. Tabralo tamat kuninga na nekanikit na ikayugurak to nekalakirani nagalunin na nekanik nekapkay doon tayo na ikayurak kamarak tamat ko na ni. Tabralo tayo na mga nunapting nun ilawrok. Tabralo tayo na tunaglan itchakrat nutakanting na ika-inyunak kimakparakait. Na hunalakatigo ang ilugo hapekrakawrut na inyugo ko na kamitigit nutakating. Hewe miptak tayo na ikayo hemarok tau chimin mata inuit. Tayo na lutak tabra ilihimagatin yung ektot tamani inyunak tot. Hewe me. Tabra lutak tayo na skirauraktot nagaluni kahirauraktot tayo na ikayo himagait na muna kay himagait tayo na lu ikayo himarok tayo nagalip ka kanayak lugit. Kaya nak. Tabra lu tayo na muna kay kami tayo na. Inuyak to ni ataramik tabra tayo na kanyak to put na galuni na tabratam na ilihimagiga ilokating na pichak para kagat nutakakay ilihimabluwa kaya nak apakarinya patuli alakot takpabani pilak to ni pakakpita nagalunin pitpat tabraw na apakir takak tugo ko na frame like me kaya nako kaktok tabraw na apakita kilang niyariga na huamati. Huamatawak nalo kanok tinagalan na ikayutaw niyak pa. Kanok lo matuma hibon na rebang mani Northwest Territories ni. Na una kiwaki pingahuni ukiuni. Tabraw kuat tayo na tinagalan. Tabrap tayo na tinagalan na ikayo manna huamati ilihimagigput tayo na tinagalan agalinyak tuak na agaluni habaw tayo masung kinyak tuak himagigput. Ikakaklo man na nunakput Northeast Territories ni. Mani huamati tuak tabar tayo na tinagalan habak himagat tayo na habak tuak atulay. Ilitsaka niya put kanak hibon ikiranga tap tuma ilyakirap tingnik. Kuyanak. Frame like me. Kuyanak pag ko minyihitak. Tabrap tawak tamat ko na pigo mangiligit gubot kanok utek takto at akraligak pangnik utek tayo at kanok haga hoting hunik pihuk Inuit kokak koyanak. Tabraw na okakte kuyagili tikpin. Tabrap tawak na alagi tutin na kanok angalar rutingit. Tabrap tawak na ilokating tayo na tabrap tawak tam na kanyak tuwali tikput pang mapakilihimagigput pingahuni ukiwini ilyakidakput. Tabralo tayo na ataw hiutakad ni na tam na habaw takilay tikput ataw tihutakalo kaya nakpag. Tabralo una apakyo takifalang niya kaya. Kanona una apakyo takilang nilig kiga. Kanakulo tamat ko na alakunit na tuyo tigirakanak pati tamat ko ato una tabra una okakte kiulang niya agpin tabralo tayo na tunaglan tamat ko maikam ikayo kakatigot kanok tamat ko nukta kanya matigit nagalunin haga kanya matigit kanoklo taman na kanok angalan niya tabi ako kanguna tabralo tawak tamat ko na
commit to developing a Northwest Territories hydrogen strategy that will examine these issues and more. Merci, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Minister of Infrastructure.
Queen, I
tabraw na ilihimagput pang mapakin na tunaglan ukto takput ito atun isagon ngarok aglan tabrap pang mapakhuli kanyak tuarik putin na taman na tutkikaniak tila nga tap tuma ilihima ilokata tayo nalo Inuvialuktun havaktinik na tamatkoatili hemakpaktot piigumalaitkivut tamatkuninga ilitsoqaniaqapta naagaluunnin hivunikiraqa ngattaaptuma qoyanarpak oqarti tabrauna apeqiutaqillangniaqaigaaunaanniartoolaqili minihitaulaaqanniartoolaqilinik tabralu tainnatunagalan qaffi inuviaktuanik na agilaan tabrutaamna kavalortuat na qanoq tamatkuati na ikayuillavat tamatkuninga анниартуалеқилити на кавлуиниартуати қаноқилитсеқип каллапатигиттай на кавлуилуат таврааққуяарпаалуиккига таврауна аперуутаитсоқ тавратаамна на уна иллиқиларпут наага иллиқилангат тайна кавлуиникун тавралу тайнам тааптума илитсуэпкаалартугу таматкунууна қақиауратигут илитсуэпкарлугит таматкуатинна тавралу тайна илитсуэпкаллалугут тайна оқартуаник итна илитсуэпка илихимауктуаник тавралу тайна қақиауратигун илилариикпут қақиауранун илилариикпут таманна илитсорилагрaq тавра тайна тавра хивуллерми на таманна исагутиларатараман пувахлуорнеқи на иликкарпут илитсори ан кангеққитқувлугит инуит қаноқ аторуниартилаагангат таматтума хооқ аторуниартилаагангат наагалуунни қанорутин таамна атулланингат тавертаапкуат илитсорип қаққимагивут қоянарпак South қоянақ
plan going forward to address mental health issues attributed to this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we do not at this point have a specific pandemic mental health action plan, but depending on the results of the community counselling questionnaire, that may be a good direction for us to go in. In the meantime, we do offer a wide range of services, and I certainly hope that the member is promoting those services in whatever way he can: community counselling, online services, out-of-territory services.
Tamakop tava ilitsaapkaaniaartu tatarmiktaitna pihalatitsiaquta nalo tavertaapkuatit na nakuariñeritkaauanga tuhaakama taitna hinikit na ikayuiniartuanika oqarti oqarti tabrauna kiullangnaliitkikpit tabrauna utoqqanaatinna ikayoriarlugit ilitsuqipqarniarlugit tava tainnatunagalaani namatkuatikayuillarut tava tamatkuninga itna isumaartuanik oqaqqatigiranginnik matkualun taqqatitna isumaarpata ikayuirugramik tava tainna illiqiimalugut tavalu tainnaptauqa itna qanoqpiniartilaagrangit ilitsorep kakkimagitka. Ila inawallani tamat kodit na ilitsore huktuat tain na ilitsorep karneaqaugivut. Kuyanaqpak. Aqullermik aperuittaqaruvit. Tabe oqarti tabe tawaquna na iliharvingi nutaqqatit na ikayortiqartuat kauntallanik pilaqigaitit na ikayuigulaqtuat oqaqatigilaarigait matkuat nutaqqat quyanarpak aaligaatavura taamnaapersuuttaq nakuaqaniqiga tabap tawakuat ECE kut taamna ilihimagaat sisamanik ukiuni tamat kuatit na taitna ikayuiniartuat oqaqtitaran oqauhinginnigit na ilihimaniartuat tutrikkhainiartuutaapkuninga oqaqatigilla hivlugi matkuat utoqqan nutaqqat tamatkununga kauntallanik pilarigait kauntallatahi taimat tutrikkaarralugit tamat isumaalugilangit tamatkuat nutaqqat taaptaminga ikayuirugramik illaqihimmalugut quyanaq taruuq apaqiuttaqani tavraukuat utaqqipiaqtut qaangataima utaqqihaqataqami utaqqilut tavraukuatit na utaqqilaqtut qakuunagilaan igiloqarniartilaaggramingnik quyanaq tabraunigiluraqili minihitangat una tabrauna qanutunaglaani na nunakputnin tigutiksaitsunga quyanaq taapkuat pingahut ulukartuumin 2, 3 pingahut malruk pingahut taitna ikayuurleqqramingnik ivarlertuat taina tunaglaan taapkua na pihimavatti tavallu tamatkuatit na igilulleqilitit na tutrikkimai igivut qanaquniartilaaggangit quyanaq oqarti nunakput ila maani nunaptingni na igilunik nappaillaruanik piqartugut ingmiktigun havaalgit tamatkua tavrakavamatit na ikayullavatigit taitna igilunik nappainniartuat qilamipayaaqartu taitna ilihimatkuat ilihimagitka nappailaqartuat agilaan utaqqerpaktuatunit na inngaipayaaqeroqit na nappaikpatat tamatkuat ingmiktigun havaalgit quyanarpak quyanaq tamatkuatit na tavallu taitna tamatkuatit isumagalaqiivut qanuqa uktuqauqlugit tabra una utilaw tunga huli kanok pakiutanganik. Tabra ilihimagit ka, tabra ilihimagibot. Tait na tunagalan, sak sabami, sak sabamilyo. Tabra ulok haktomi naglan nalurungan naluit ka kihutagalan utak hiningit. Utak hidot nagalunin. Tabra koyak parlit kiyaw na minihitawrak. Tabra tawak tamat ko na utak hanadi sa malugiligit kitka ing mikti tait na igilo kakanak totit nalo awlak ti takalugit mat ko tutok hanat pinya ngay right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam.
Thank you. Minister for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very encouraged to be working with all Indigenous groups throughout the Northwest Territories, and if they're coming up with wanting to pursue partnership or finding additional and
Tighten up tabra tamat ko ikayo hung miyong tamat ko ni nga aglan o kakatigi kakalugit igiluyok tot nagalunin igilutigun ikayo ilarong aptak tight na nga kaya nak tabra ko tamat ko isumay rabutin na kanok kakti tabra tabra ko na ilihimari put tabra na isa ko tenik kangat tabra lo una hibo na kagat tabra lo tight na tunagalan napay niyak tuat nagalonin isagun nga niyak tuat isagutin niyak tuat tabra ukyakrapak tight na tamat ko din na tight na taman na atok niyak putin na hibon na kay putki kano ko niyak tilakang tamat ko tabra lo apikapal lang niyak kaku tabra taman na Mackenzie Valley tamat ko kaku naniak pa rung taman na apkotekpak tabra tamat ko di na kakatiga kaluit habag tingit tamat na tabra kanu kagalan man na kanu tunagalan na habaw takanya kangat kanu tunagalan ahin naniak tilakang tabra tamat ko nga ataw hitche ako na o kangit kikput tamat ko imakun nunakun.
Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister can provide clarity on something. According to the Department of Infrastructure's website, 40 of 42 bridges and 2 access roads have
tamat ko tutkikanak tilakrangit naga tutkikanik tangit tabra tamat ko na ilihimagit ka kanok taman na tap tamamini tamakalaw tigil o kailabang tamat ko natating natangit inuit habagtat tabra tight na 14 kilometer dun tam na Norman Wells nin tabra 2018 we tam na nachimagat tabra ni apkoheo kaming tabra luptak tamat ko din na hibihu hilugo na habakrak tabra luptak na tunagalan tabra taman na tight na tabra tawak tamat ko din na kanok tamat koti kaakot ittauk habauttaqilarivut ituatunahin habauttariuhlugit piniararivut aglaan tabra habauttarigaluarivut ilaan ni atauhitsia habauttarilait kikput innugiakkimmata qiyanak qakugu aglaan tabratamanna apqoteqpak mikansivalimi naanniarpatrung ilitsuarihullakkalorta qiyanartiaq taam pianikparrung tabralu tainnatunagalaan qanutuna tamatkuatinna inugiaktuatinna tihima na taamna naanniangittiga aglaan inugiaktugut katimaqqaaqata naagaluunni tamatkuatinna hivunaqiraptingnik.
Questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. In the 2017
2022 me Tapkotinam. Tapkotina is 22 me 2022 me una ilichoriaukiga kanok isumagemagan nagaluni kanok hibunagemagan una tamat kuninga nutakkanik kayo nyaktuat aglan pangmapagkahuli nalupkay tamna kuyanak okakti.
Specific supports are provided to families and guardians to help them recognize the signs or symptoms of a mental health emergency in their children long before it gets to the point of suicide. Where do parents go for help when they find themselves in this situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the member shining a light on this area. It's obviously every parent's worst nightmare is to fear that their child has suicidal.
Sumalugira kagait no takating tamay lokating tap ko kanok tam na ang makamaong kuya paralit kiga ilitsukila ko bulugi tamani inyi nawalani ining ni inakpang ni ilokay ni tamat kuninga okaktinik oka tamat tutkikay ni aktuanik inyugi aktuanik ilyakay marugut. Tabralo tayo na ang yokaguro na isumalak tot kanok no takating isumalo gago tiblugit ingming yun ang nakalawak tinagit. Kuya nakpak. Tabralo tayo na ilihimar mane ilyakay marugut tayo na ikayo kalakan niya aktuanik. Kuya nak.
Not just for children. My next question is, does the Department of Health record statistics for children on overdose, suicide attempts, mental health assistance, medevacs, etc.? If Ontario can provide us with the statistics that 1 in 5 children are having mental health problems, where are those statistics for the NWT? How many children are in our mental health system, and how is their progress tracked and recorded? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I'll return with that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Final supplementary, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, will the minister finally admit that we are in a mental health crisis here in the Northwest Territories after 2 years of this pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I recognize that the pandemic has been incredibly stressful for almost everyone. It's produced a lot of anxiety, depression, loneliness, especially for people who live on their own, like elders. And we have provided services throughout. The demand for services is uneven. At this point, we are able to keep up with the demand for services, and so I feel confident that we're not facing anything that we can't deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Merci, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Finance Minister presented Budget 2022 to 2023, in which he stated that making flashy announcements and hoping new money would solve long-standing problems. And it goes on to state that the goal is to influence the path for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's where it's concerning, and it actually got me off my seat. Because there's a real issue that we see that's not being addressed, because what I don't see in bold and funding is towards the Indigenous recruitment and training and retention. This is important, as the Minister is stating that this path is already being set for 5 to 10 years, and we're not really addressing this. This has been an ongoing problem. Can the Minister address this long-standing issue? Merci.
Thank you. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am more than happy to address this. We've done actually, in some ways, actually, this is exactly the kind of thing I was speaking to. We do want to be influencing where we are in 5 to 10 years, and that does mean we need to be taking action today for Indigenous recruitment and retention. That is why we've moved forward on the Indigenous recruitment and retention framework. That was released earlier, or I guess a few months ago now. We've had an opportunity to speak to committee about that and have a public review of that alongside committee, and I was grateful for the feedback that we got at that opportunity. We're also continuing to put forward an LGBT human resources plan, so that this is, really that the approach that we're taking to Indigenous recruitment and retention is one that is built into that plan and built into everything we do in the Department of Finance and with our human resources. So, we already are doing a lot in this space, and it is exactly my hope that that's the kind of thing where we have that work, we are doing that work, we need to get word out about that work, we need all the departments to be working together towards that goal, because in 5 to 10 years, and frankly even before that, it would be pretty amazing to be one of the top employers in Canada for inclusion and diversity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary, member for Decho.
Merci, Madam Speaker, and merci to the Minister for that. Since the start of the 19th Assembly, many of us on this side of the floor have made the issue of Indigenous hiring and a review for the affirmative action policy. I think the policy's goal was 50 or 51%. We're at 30-something%, and I think it dropped down to 29. So we're not even meeting our targets, and this government's been here this is the 19th Assembly. We're not putting our mouth where we should be putting the action. I'm not seeing it in any of the budgets that, this issue is highlighted and budgeted for, and that's a concern. We've always spoken about the geography of the Northwest Territories as the makeup is predominantly Indigenous and Inuvialuktun and Métis. And we're always fighting that losing battle. We're always battling the governments here. Government is fighting back with our people forever. And that's a big concern to us as Indigenous people and Indigenous leaders. I highlighted the fact that I was an employee.
Tabertam na ay papagtay na kinaktori raktugut tangungi cholo tangurolo tay na taramik isoatunin na ataw chikuakto tay na habalay chut ilichore tamna ilichore leo khinyahlugo tamna piga tabar ilokata tayo na tao chikuakta. Tamat kop tao tabar tayo na kanok tabar lu tayo na lu tabar tam na ukto akhe magalo akhe ilichaka huklugo. Ilichaka hupiauklugo. Tabar lu tayo na himik ikayo halaganyak toamik na ilihawri niyak toamik ilihawra kakok tugut. Tabar tayo na himik.
To be able to place. And we need this government to start listening.
Ukot kabamata nalak to ako rugut na tuhat ko lekhugut pang mapak. Tabar ko yakpak. Finance. Kinyaranig mo nakriruak. Tabar tam na kiulay tam na kanok. Tabar lutay na tunagilani na malakotaleani tok kanok tamat kot angalan niyak tat nagalunin hibunikrat. Tabar tap kot tay na tunagilan isumagiraki tabar tamat kot pigo mangit kibut ilihimagibut kanokin niyak ito tabar ni tabar lutay na tutkikaw luita isumatigiraki taramik. Tabar kabamaw kaptaw kabamaw rogudu bani. Tabar tay na tamat ko tay na itwatun pihukit kibut. Tabar lu tamat ko tatuakrabot kinyawrat na atokop tigit nagalunin hipakakpan. Tam na hipakakpan kinyawrak tabar tam na takatulang migput. Tabar lu tay na tamat ko nutagurot na ilihaw tilugit nagalunin habakatigiluit tay na ilitsarap kakanya kayakibut. Tabar tao ko na tabar nutaguro ko na. Ukot ilitsar kabut tay na kanok kabamaluin na Inuit tangungit cholu tay na habakatigin na utim mata kaya paralitit ka. Kaya nakakakti. Yellowknife Northman. Kaya nakakakti. Tabraw na okakika ako akililyat kabulugit matkot habang ihakto at habang wingming niya. NWT mi ay kakahluman na NWT. Kaya ilunin, nalokkinaktok. Tabraw na kanoklo tamat kotit na habang ihakan na hibihu hilyakok padrong. Tabraw lutay na isumatikap tigi. Kanok taman na tutkikanak tilaka nga pigput. Tabar tam na kuyagi una apakirta kay mang tam na una isagutigilaktin nago upani katimarot hibunioktit nagaluni tabara kuya nakpak. Tabra taok tait na tunaglan. Tabra tait na kuyak parlay kit ka tamat ko tin na tamat ko tin na akilira to tin na habang ihaktonik habang wingming ni kaya nak isianim tam na ilihimag putay na 15 tun luni $19,000 tun 19,000 tun itchung naktak tamani habang ihakamata akilikta kangit like me kaya nak oka una pakirta lang na yakali tabana apakirlaw kia una tabana kanok tabana pakirta lang na yakali tabra una kanok ilulakadit ikayo ka na patigit na NWT ni habagtot kanok ikayo ka na tilakang Inuvialuktun tabra kot na ikayo tiksanikit na tawdong na chok hibo na rin mi putam na huli kaya nak like me tabra tam na alang ulong na kay tam na pakirta ka tabra tamat ko din na atan na relyo habag toli na alagay lang mata kanok na ang akto kaluit pingit kalawakay una tawak kinyaranik minihitak tabralu tayo na ilitsaka niya lagi puta kanok tamat ko dia ikayo rakrat ilitsaka kalugit na galunin kihutagalanin na ikayo rakrat inyugak totit na ilihimagalawak lugit kanok lo tamat ko din na akilinyak tot habag tuanik tabra tayo na tabra tam na okay pa na put kaya nak ko kakte tabra na kuya yak parli tiya una minihitak tabra tam na tap to mani ukiumi kanok itum matigin yak tilakranga
of the public health emergency. It'll be interesting to see how that has an impact on sick days going forward, and if people being able to have
tabra tayo na tamat ko na ukakamaong tam na tabra tayo na ukakilakang ako kanok matkot ukakamatigit kanok at akilir niya patigitin na kinyaranik habang ihak pata habang ni tabralu tawak tam na anihimarok tap tumanga pubakiloko nimin kanok alagi kilyugo pikangat tabrap tawak tam na
related perhaps in part, though certainly doesn't encompass everything that I know is specific to mental health, but about that wellness of employees, the wellness.
Tabraptak tam na matkot ikayokla niya tot matkunani una pimangan puwaklokonek tamanin ngan ay malong niu kyung ni kanok ikayokonek tilakangit matkot ikayutisyanik ibaklek tot nagaluni pakitsirak tot mat kuninga habak tukranik tamat kuninga isumaktot matkot isumalugib-lugit isumaktot o kawti raglugit isumangitin na nakit kablugit kuya nakpak kollekrak apakautakanguna.
Member for Trinidad Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I got a question for the Finance Minister.
Apakar lang na kaya na kinyaranik minhitawrak. Tabralo tam na ilan ni atukiraktut. Nagalunin ay tsokakigait atutikranganik kinyaranik. Kanok tam na atokakibihiyong ilitsokilyaw nga kanok angalatsumbagan tam na. Tabertap kot ilihima tam na allagiktok. Allagiktok tamat atukkiutingit nagalunin atokonat matkotahin atokonak kangit allagilaktot ilangit allangarut natun kanutunagalan kinyaranik pikpatigut kanutunagalan tawak tamatkot na allagit atokonak to tap tuminga kinyaramik pinyaktilakrangan ilitsore karnago okakilait kikputagalan ilihima rapting ni kiulang narikpin. Tabalo ilangit angirut ilangit mikirut.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, supplementary. Member for Trinidad Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Minister also explain as the grants contribution comes in and it's broken down, you normally would have to do a reporting on those grants or contributions back to Government Canada. When that happens, and we go ahead and spend the monies here in Northwest Territory,
Tabertamat ko pakiutakilakit ka kanokot atuk kira arabatigit na ato akranginik kanutunagalan pitarabatigit. Taber Canada min tayo na kinyaranik na atuk kira matigit kanok utikti chinakpa taxi tigun.
To their counterparts in the federal government, and as we go through the review department by department, starting I think later today, we'll have, I would certainly encourage everyone in the House to engage exactly in that dialogue of, what is it that we have to report back to the federal government on, what is perhaps the nature of that reporting, and always open to having a conversation about whether we are providing enough information that is available publicly, but also, what is the kind of relationship we have with the federal government as will be reflected in the dollars that come in. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary. Member for Trinidad Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for that response.
Trinidad Willowday tabertai na Tamna apahutakallang neriga ila ni ikayo tishranik ibakalerurugut wani 20-day walidemi na inaurami taptomani kanok atuk kerenyak patabranga atuk kerenyak tuamin nagalunin kinyaranik
In place with communities, and how did we arrive at these numbers? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the budget, of course, isn't drawn up on a per capita basis. It's not per 33 communities divided up by 33. There are occasions, for example, with MACA's budget, where, of course, members may want to ask about the specific dollars that go into a community. But for most departments, a lot of what happens is territory-wide. So, for example, education or health is delivering services that may be regional. They may be delivering services that are, done in a headquarters. There are services that are done, planning, communications that are done that benefit all of the territory and can't quite be divided out. Even some of the large infrastructure that we put into place, Madam Speaker, there's projects that benefit multiple regions, or indeed again, when we're talking about significant roadways crossing different ridings and indeed benefiting projects up in the
taina tabra atuk kararigait atuk kamitigit taina tunagalan na allagingit chut yalonait min nagalunin inawalani kanutunagalan atuk karanyak totin na pigo mangit ilihimagibut kanolo kanakatuti syangat kayanak kayanak tabrona habakatigi hukiga una ilihimadok nagalunin kinyara nikit na atururok atok tilangit kinyara dilichaka huktunga kanok atoko magaita tabralutam tait na inyong nikit na habak tichinyaktuat kiyanak kinyaranik mani imijarak tabrana tabralutait na tunagan ilihimarugut tabratait na kabamaurogut ubagut ataw chikuni na kamilakayokulugu nagaluni ilichokanyakalugu kanok tilaksangit tabrakutag tam na pinyak kangat kayanakpak tabrona una apakirtakalang nakakaya tabrunga tapkuat munakre na ikayuin yurakuroanik munakre tamatkuala tabra kanok tamatkuat ikayui hubat matkuat munakaraurat tabralu tamatkuat na tabralu tait na tunagalan tabra tamatkuat ilichakaliauktunga kanok na ituatun matkuat munakaraurat anniaktualakirit anniaktualakirinik ikayuin yura peangitchut tabra kuat mani ilihimagibut kanitunagalan tabra ilokating ilingita ingmiktigoakaktut ingmiktigon ukakaktut nagaluni ingmiktigoni na hannayakarigatam na himunniwakuting kanokniaktilakramingnik tabra tait na ukakatigilagupki tabra ni tamatkuat munakriro tait na anniaktualakarinik nagaluni ikayuiraktonik kuyanak tabra tamatkuat kiullavanguna kanok kayo iniaktuat matkuninga anniaktualakirinik kuyanak ukakti tabra una nalliat una nalliat kuakpa una nalliat ukakabang kuyanak 2019 tabra ingmik tigun ingmik tabra tamna ukakamarung na makperanen iliblugo makperanen iliblugo tamna kuleak pikangat tabra tapkotin na matkot GNWT kavamaurat manin nun GNWT na kanok matkot na ilichorep kallakugaloarit kai na tamat kuninga ukhautigi marrung nalu agalang nermarrung tabrunga agalatingi na utimulain matigit ilihimarunga tabraluk tauktait na kuyanak kuyanak na kinyaranik pekaktut tabralu kanok tabrani kanok tinaglaan kinyaranik ay chok matigut tabra tamna atokakikput kanok hiang neak tilakranga kanok atokoneak tilakranga tait nakota tabra tait na tamna hannayak kemagikput tabra ukiupak tabralu na inaralat nagaluni inikpaitait na tabra tauchukuni na ilichokanya piakluit ilichokukikka mamfrimin kuyanak
address housing, crime, education, mental health, and addictions in my regions, in Klitschko regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm not aware of a whole-of-government approach which would take in all the subject areas the member mentioned, and we don't have a specific
tamat ko din na ilokain niya kataulugit na ilihimangit ka aglan ikakakaluman na territories inagput nunakputin na tabra ilihimanayakakit kanok tamat ko din na ilyakirangit kinyaranik ilihimanayakakit ka tabra kafinik ihichitinik ikak tamat ko din na ilihimanayaktat ka $600 million tuntay na tunagalan at ako na aktilakang ilichoriga. Tamat ko dilokain niyo kaya tauluwi anak tawla kirin ni habaktut kuyanak. Frame like me. Kuyanak. Tabertam na Alberta mi Tarzan miktanik tinpirakiga tabertam na idichore fallalu tilikiga kanok minihita muma tabra kanok angalan nelit pajungukot kabamarot mani Northwest Territories ni kuyanakpak. Tabralo tayo na Alberta mi kawamangit Alberta mi taberta matkot hibun niyo kemaligit kay tap kwa kanok niyak tila krangit. Tabro kotin na GNWT mon ay chutigin niya ka tam na ilitsakirakting. Ilitsakinik takting taber tap kino nga ay chutigin niya kat. Ukakti taber tam na ilihimat kuligit kiga kanokautik put taberlo tamat kotin na imakun Tarzan mikpiblugut at chaklugut taber taman na imak kanok atoko tilakrangat nagalunin nakutilangan nagalunin huinyakok tilanga ilihimalla kuligit kikput kaya nakpak tabraw na okay kaya iligit kiga minyitak tayo na tam na ukakilang mang.
Done is considering any potential discharges of the impacts of the tar sands tailings, and that usually involves modeling of contaminants downstream. So can the minister tell us if any of this modeling work has been done and whether it includes the Northwest Territories? I'll see, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of ENR.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Government of Alberta is focusing on impacts immediately downstream from the oil sands region to the old fort. Their assessment and modelling does not extend into the NWT. Based on the outcome from the risk assessment on the initial model, they will consider extending their model to the Peace Athabasca Delta. The GNWT will request further modelling if the results are of a concern for us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the Minister for that.
Kaya ligit kaya tabra minihitaw ko na tamra tayo na isumalong naman. Mga Northern Territories ni nunapting ni na taman na isumalong niyak mga kaya ligit kaya isumalong niyak mga tabra tam na. Kaya nakpak. Kakti tabra tao ko na kakati mikat ka. Tabra Alberta mi na tam na about takayat. Tabra tao ko wagutin na isumalog kupta nagalunin hunyagi kupti ko hibuni oktang at o kakatigil lagi put.
For Frame Lake.
Frame Lake mi. Kaya nak minyitak. Tabraw na ilihima tawtuk kakput. Tabraw na ilihima iya. Tabraw na ilan ni tuhap kalait katigut tuhap kalak tiluta tuhap kalait katigut. Dahil na una nakungit chok o kay rimarjong taman na kanok kaya dikting ilihimahok tunga ubani katimabing pangmi kadin tabra habak tuud ilakata tabra ilakata tawid na habak tuud tabra kanoklo taman na tabra lo ilakating tamat ko at ENR me angunia na negrotitigun nunat kun imakun na tamat ko at pisakigait pigo malaitkait ilitsore nalo tamat ko nga ilihimak pagtonik habak takakaudugut. Tabalo tayo na tinagalan. Tayo na tamat ko din na
Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the Minister for that. You know, I keep asking the...
Apakrak tunga tabra ataramik. Ataramik tabra alamin tabra uma minihitam tam na kiulabaw. Nagarutila kali minihitak. Tabra ko tayo na tutrika na ako putin na isuatin pinya ako putam na.
The Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following document, the annual status report on the progress of the mandate of the government to the Northwest Territories, 2019 to 2023. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Minister for EC&E.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents, Yellowknife Catholic Schools 2021-2022 Capital Plan amended and Yellowknife Education District Number 1 2021-2022 Capital Plan amended. Thank you.
Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notice of motion. Notice of motions. 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 Notice of motion for first reading of bills. Notice of motion for first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration of in committee of the whole on bills and other matters. Bill 23, an act to amend the Public Utilities Act. Bill 29, Resource Royalty Information Disclosure Statute Amendment Act. Bill 38, Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2021. Table document 561-19-2, 2022-2023 main estimates with member for Decho in the chair.
I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Mr. Chair, committee would like to consider table document 561-19 brackets 2 main estimates 2022, 2023, and Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Merci, Mr. Chair.
Merci, member. Thank you, committee. We will take a short recess and resume with the first item. Merci. I now call the committee back to order. Hey. Okay. That was my gavel. That was my gavel there. It's just like being in the communities, you know, the most important person in the community is the bingo caller. Committee, we have agreed to consider table document 561-19 brackets 2 main estimates 2022 to 2023. Does the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources have any opening remarks?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair.
You may proceed with your opening remarks. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to present the 22-23 main estimates for the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Overall, the department estimated proposed an increase of $849,000 over the 21-22 main estimates. These estimates support the mandate objectives for the Department of Environment and Natural Resources while continuing to meet the GNWT's fiscal objectives to prioritize responsible and strategic spending. Highlights of these proposed estimates include increases for collective agreement of 1.42 or 35 million, and for the Bathurst and Blue Nose East Caribou of 1.03 million, offset by reductions of 850 for the Barrowland Caribou calving survey for a total of 180,000. New initiative funding of 260,000 for the Hunters and Trappers Disasters Compensation Program. Forced growth of 251,000 for increases in the air tanker contract and insurance costs. Sunsets of 968,000 in funding for completed initiatives related to the agricultural strategy, the Inuvialuktun Highway environmental assessment biologist requirements and obligations, a climate change information management position, and activities under the Nature Fund agreement with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and a reduction in funding for travel of $495,000. Through sound fiscal management and strategic investment, we continue to support this Assembly's mandate commitment by implementing the 2019-2023 Climate Change Action Plan, including estimating the NWT Climate Change Council and ensuring climate change factors are integrated into government decision-making. Supporting initiatives that promote economic diversification and jobs in the communities through territorial protected areas implementation, supporting a sustainable forest industry and expanding waste diversion programs, supporting the GNWT's work to improve food security through country food, land-based programming, and effective management of harvest species and their habitat, and contributing to GNWT wide efforts to implement UNDRIP and support regional decision-making through the established co-management system for water, wildlife, forestry, and through ENR's work on the sustainable livelihoods. This concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Minister. Does the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources wish to bring witnesses into the House?
Yes, I do, sir.
Thank you. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chambers. Merci. Will the Minister please introduce your witnesses?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On my far right is Deputy Minister Aaron Kelly, and closest to me is Director of Finance Jessica St. Arno. Thank you.
Merci. The committee has agreed to forego general comments. Does the committee agree to proceed to the detail contained in the tabled document? Committee, we will defer the departmental summary and review the estimates by activity summary, beginning with corporate management, starting on page 72, with information items on page 75. And we'll entertain questions from the members. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, on corporate management, this is where the policy, legislation, and communications function of the department's located. And there was quite a bit of work done in the last assembly on the Forest Act. So I'm just wondering if the minister can tell us if it's the intention of the department to bring forward a Forest Act bill in this assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Must see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. Yes, we are.
Mr. O'Reilly?
Mr. Chair, that's good to hear. We now have a legislative development protocol with the Intergovernmental Council, and there's provision for other Indigenous governments who didn't sign on to the DEVO agreement to be part of that process. So there's a lot of work that has to be done, and perhaps some funding that's provided to the Indigenous governments. There's some public engagement that needs to be carried out, some policy work. Can the minister tell me if there's any additional resources found in this year's budget to assist with that work? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For that detail, I'll go to the Deputy Minister. And if, with your permission, I'll ask her to provide a little bit more detail as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Proceed, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are prepared to do all of the pieces that were just mentioned, the public engagement, the work with the non-IGC IGOs, and all of the elements to get this piece of legislation completed with funding that we found from within the department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I'm a bit worried about that. I know other departments went to the Financial Management Board to secure additional resources, and I guess the other pieces of legislation, the Waters Act, the Environmental Protection Act, that's not going to happen in this assembly. So can I get an explanation from the minister as to why no additional resources were secured from the Financial Management Board for the Forest Act work? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. So when we were looking at the Forest Act, we looked at our resources that were available, the work that was done in the 18th Assembly, and the work that we need to do to get this legislative proposal forward and passed in this Assembly, and we feel that the resources we have presently, we will be able to meet that need. But for further detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister to see if there's anything else that would be helpful. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have much to add other than that we've looked for the resources internally and been able to identify them, and we feel that we have the resources that we need to complete the work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that. I'll be watching it very closely, and I am concerned about the level of resourcing. But I want to move on to the Community Harvester Assistance Program. This program has been under review for at least 2 years. It was even raised in the last Assembly about how effective this was in building some food security and enabling people, particularly in smaller communities, to get out and get country foods. So it's been under review for at least 2 years. What is the timeline for finishing this review and securing some additional resources for the program? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Timeline, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister for giving the detail of the timeline, realizing the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have completed the engagement on the review of CHAP, and We released a What We Heard report where we've asked to check in with Indigenous governments and harvesters to ensure that we got it right. That response is due back on February 10th of 2022. Even now, we're starting to work on some of the changes to the program, and we will be coming back hopefully in the summer with the final version of all the changes that will be made to that program. I will just add here very briefly that there are a number of other programs, and when we did the engagement, we heard that CHAP is not the only program that is needed. There's skill development and other elements, and we've been working on those and have new programs related to those as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, can someone tell me when the last time the Community Harvester Assistance Program amount was actually increased? Because it looks like it's just a constant for as long as the main estimates appear, or the years that are listed here. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Minister.
Oh, sorry. For that detail, I'd go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While there haven't been increases to the CHAP funding, there have been increases to funding that have been used for some of the training programs that I mentioned, trapper training, some of the resourcing to ensure that that others are available to access these programs, not just the CHAP program itself. So there has been some additional resources, but not specifically for CHAP. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to let the minister in on a little secret. I expect that there's going to be a supplementary appropriation, probably come forward maybe May, June, for this set of main estimates, and I want to encourage him to bring forward an increase in funding for the Community Harvester Assistance Program. So I'll just put that out on the record. I want to move on to the Disaster Compensation Fund. That's a grant. It's on page 74 of the main estimates. And I see that the actual amount for 2020-2021 was $400,000. And I think this was as a result of flooding on Tolson and damage that was done to people's cabins and so on. So it's good to see that the amount has been increased to $275,000 in this year's main estimates, but it's still not even what was paid out last year or a couple of years ago. So why is this not increased to a greater extent than just the $275,000? And what would happen if there's more claims than that submitted? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, so when we increased it, it's based on applications when harvesters submit their applications, and that's how we come up with our numbers. Right now, it's based on that, but for further detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister to explain if we have over expenditure and what happens moving forward on that. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We requested some additional funding to review this program. It's quite similar from a flooding aspect to one that we also have for forest fires. And we wanted to do a program review this year, which is ongoing. And we did request additional funds because of the flooding along the Tolston, where we knew that we would require additional funds. So to date, there have been $185,000 in claims related to the Tolston flooding. So the intent here is to review the program and make any adjustments that are needed, and also to ensure that it's similar in nature to the fire one, the fire compensation program that we have as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks for that information. So this review, one of the questions I had was whether the criteria are going to change, because I understand there's only some things that can get claimed. There's a maximum amount, and that not everybody was necessarily happy with the amount that they received compared to the actual damages. So when is this review going to be finished, and when will the criteria be changed? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
For that detail, go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're working on the review right now. There are a number of criteria that were reviewed, and there were some criteria that, for a specific purpose, for the Tolston flooding, were adjusted. One of the things that we have here is this is for harvesters, and one of the criteria pieces that 25% of your income needs to come from that. But we recognize in this day and age that many people are harvesting, but 25% is of their income. It's quite a large amount. So we're looking at all of the criteria when we're doing the review, and we'll most likely adjust some of that criteria through the review process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Riley?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's all I have for this activity. Thank you.
Joe? Are there any further questions for Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess just further along about the disaster compensation program, do we anticipate that there's going to be a lot of claims this year coming from the flooding that happened around in the date show last year? Are we prepared for that, or are we going to see more issues? Are we going to be back looking for more money later? Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister?
So in the date show, we had flooding. We addressed those already. We've already dealt with it. But again, I can't tell you what's going to happen. Predict it, like if it's going to be there. So we feel right now with our budget, we are close to being able to do it and move forward on it. But if we have a bad flood season as we did last year, then we may have to come back again. But right now we feel that with the money we have allocated in the budget, we should be able to meet the needs moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to reiterate support for some of the grants and contribution, or the contribution funding here. I'd also like to see increases over time with some of the on-the-land work and the take the kid trapping, et cetera, et cetera. So more of a comment that I just would like to also see some increase there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Minister?
Thank you very much. We will be looking at those things as we move forward. Thank you.
Let's see. Any further questions, Ms. Knockleby? No. Any questions on this section? Ms. Martselos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like clarity on the Forest Act, because when the Wildlife Act was passed, I was chief at the time, and the public engagement was not, we were not listened to. And there was some sections in the Act that we still have a problem with in my community, especially the First Nation, the two First Nations. And so I'm wondering when those public engagements are going to start, and hopefully they're face-to-face and not virtual. I think it's extremely, I don't want it to happen and then there is no engagement, you know, because not everybody wants to go virtual, especially First Nation people. I know that from experience. So that is one of my concerns. So I'd like an answer to that, please.
Merci. Ms. Martselos. Minister?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank the member for that. I can guarantee you we are going to do public consultation. We also have the process with IGCs that we are working with through that process. But for the detail on exactly how we're going to do it, I will, with your permission, turn to the Deputy Minister to answer that rest of the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're currently working with a technical working group to create a legislative framework, and that would translate to drafting the bill, and then the bill would be reviewed by the technical working group as well. And once we have the bill, we will consult with Indigenous governments on the bill, and we will also engage with the public. Depending on what the situation is at the time, we will offer to meet with folks, whether it's virtually or in person, and we understand that in person is better, but we'll see where we're at with the COVID situation at that time. And our hope is that we will be doing some of that work in this summer, but it will depend on how far we get with the technical working group, because it's important that we get the bill right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Martselos.
Further to the Wildlife Act, you know, Salt River was, it has to follow the Wildlife Act, but there's no enforcement on reserve. You know, they expect, the government of the Northwest Territories expects all members on reserve to follow the act, and but we don't have no enforcement when we have poachers or anyone else on the lands. And I just wonder, Mr. Chair, if that is going to be addressed eventually. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Marcellus, Minister.
Thank you very much. We've been reaching out to the federal government, talking with the federal government. We've worked with, had conversations with Salt River First Nations, and we're moving forward on that. But for the detail of where we are right now, I will turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is that we're still engaged in the conversations about the trilateral MOU, and that we're committed to finding the right tool to address enforcement concerns on Salt River First Nation land. The main issue that we have is that the GNWT cannot directly regulate or enforce specific territorial legislation on federal land. But we would like to work with Salt River First Nation in finding a solution, and perhaps that would be a federal regulatory tool. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Marcellus.
My final question, Mr. Chair, is about the Harvesters Support Program. It has remained the same for years, and there's not a big increase or anything in this, like some of my colleagues have mentioned. And it's the one program that affects everybody within the First Nations, whether it be Métis or First Nation Dene in my community. And, you know, it's important that we look at that, and increases should be done throughout the Northwest Territories on the Harvesters Support Program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Marcellus, Minister.
Thank you. As the Deputy Minister said previously, we are working on what we heard report. The deadline for responses for February 10th. But also, as the Deputy Minister has said, we have other programs out there that we've heard from our users of the program, which is our Indigenous governments and our harvesters and our people in the communities on what they would like to see. So we are working on it, and I think if I remember correctly, we're supposed to have something prepared by midsummer to bring forward. And for further detail, I'll just ask the Deputy Minister to clarify if I missed anything. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're already working on some of the items that have been brought before us to improve the CHAP program. And there are a number of others once we get the responses back on February 10th, where we checked in on the What We've Heard document with harvesters and Indigenous governments to make sure we had it right, that we'll continue to work on, and we'll come back in the summertime with a plan on what we've accomplished and what we still have to accomplish to update the program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Mussy, I guess we are getting some more information forthcoming. Any further questions on this section? Ms. Whale Armstrong.
Thank you. I see that you said there's an increase in the contribution for the Harvester Support Program. Because I've been hearing from families, especially young families, in the small communities who rely heavily on country foods. So what they're saying is that because of, lately they've been seeing an increase in groceries and gas. It's making it difficult for them it's difficult for them as it is, especially for those with low income, from low income family. What they're saying is that now that with the caribou restriction in place, it is hard for us to go out because of the gas. The gas price has increased in the small communities. So there is a lot of talks about that, harvesting country food. What I would like to, I just want to ask about that because this program, Harvester Support Program, is really, it really helps a lot of, I know it helps a lot of people, it helps a lot of families due to the increase in groceries and gas and all that. So I want to ask, how do you guys allocate? How is this fund allocated to the regions or to the small communities?
Must see Ms. Whale and Armstrong. Minister?
For that type of detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a formula, which is one of the things that's being reviewed, but we provide funding to the Indigenous government or the RRB, and they provide funding to the community members. That's one of the things that was brought forward as a concern, is that sometimes people are not unable to access the CHAP funding. With respect to the other elements of the comment there, we have Take a Family on the Land program that's new because we heard that that was something that was really important to people, where we've allotted, there was $209,000 allotted in 2020 to that, and $166,000 to 17 groups this January. So that's a new program that is along the lines of CHAP and supporting some of the aspects of CHAP where there's funding, as well as a regional COVID harvesting subsidy and regional community training and knowledge exchange programs. So there is additional work in addition to CHAP. The funding formula is one that we're looking at right now, but it's up to the recipients of the funding at the Indigenous government level to distribute the funds within their area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see, Ms. Whale and Armstrong.
Thank you. So you said there's a formula in place. So the money that's there, it's 1 point something million, 1.3 million here. So is it allocated based on needs or per capita?
Massey, Ms. Whale and Armstrong. Minister?
That detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's allocated based on a funding formula, which I believe takes into account the number of potential recipients, and then the need is dealt with by the Indigenous government to provide it to those in need within their area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Massey, Ms. Whale and Armstrong.
Okay. Yes, because right now, usually at this time, people from my region, they harvest caribou, and in the past they used to go to our regions, cultural regions, but now they have to go long distance, and it's just a lot of them are saying that it's hard, it's difficult if you don't have the means, if you don't have a vehicle, if you don't have any of the stuff that. It's really hard for them to access country food, especially caribou, which is the main diet for the people in the regions. So that's why, so that's why I was asking about that, because Harvester Support Program really helps family, especially if you have to travel from the outlying communities all the way to McKay Lake. In that, it's and now with the increase in gas, a lot of people are complaining that. It's hard, it's difficult for them. And now with the mobile zone, that it's, the mobile zone is huge. It's difficult for people to go hunting. And some people, they go there, they come back, they cannot, they come back empty, with no caribou, nothing, because it's too far. And then the Arwit are making it more difficult for my people, especially for my people, that to go to harvest caribou, they go long ways. Like, for example, for family from Gamity, there's a ice road, winter road now. Winter road is open, so people are going out, and for them to travel from their community to Barren Land, and it's hard, it's difficult. So I just want to know if anytime soon they're going to change or the mobile zone not to be huge right now because they're unable to go hunting. They can go hunting, but it's like they have to go further. So that's why I'm saying that. So I just want to know if there's any plan in place to change the mobile zone to accommodate the people that wants to go harvest caribou. It's not just for my region, but every year there's people from other regions that go hunting as well, like from across the lake. We see them go there, and then even from Decho, people go there too. So, and last year, a few times, there were some people from Satu region as well. So that's why, is there any plan in place that, you know, like, just so that people can harvest caribou? Thank you.
Okay, Mussey, Ms. Whale and Armstrong, if we can be mindful of the time and the other speakers, keep our preamble short and to the point if we can. Minister?
Thank you. There is no looking at shrinking the mobile zone. The mobile zone is done with where the caribou are, where our collared caribou is, and it's also working with our Indigenous governments and the Renewable Resource Board, the Wekuji Renewable Resource Board. So we work with the Indigenous governments. We work with the the councils, the leadership, and we explain it. We work with it, and it was developed in collaboration with our Indigenous government. It was with the Clecho, they talked about it. If you look at the Bathurst right now, we're at about 6,200 caribou left. The Beverly is available, and we've, in our conversations with our Indigenous governments, we've talked about working with them on setting up community hunts. We talked about doing that. We've also talked about working with the communities to identify where the Beverly is located so that we can work with them on this. But for further detail, I would like to ask the Deputy Minister to add anything I may have missed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to highlight from the Minister's comments, the mobile zone is work that we do with Clecho government and with the Wekuji Renewable Resources Board. So that's joint work, and it's to protect the remaining Bathurst caribou. ENR is supportive of harvest of the Beverly herd, which is a healthy herd, and we have provided additional funding this year because we recognize how challenging it is for Indigenous governments that access those caribou, and they have been unable to well, it's much more difficult. They haven't been unable to, but it's been much more difficult. The reason that the mobile zone is so large is because the caribou are distributed across a large area, and it's challenging when there's mixing of the herds, which we've had this year and last year. So we recognize that there are those concerns, and we're working with the Clecho government and other governments on ways that we can promote respectful harvest and help them to access caribou that are in numbers that are, you know, that are safe to harvest. Thank you.
Ms. Whalen Armstrong.
Yeah, well, that's good if they're, I think this is, I'm hearing it from people, you know, I'm not hearing from the leaders. So it's good that maybe they, but it's just that I'm hearing from other people as well. So that's why I am addressing their concerns, because they rely heavily. And some of them said, I mean, if it wasn't for the traditional food, you know, like it would be more difficult for them with the increase in groceries and gas, and it prohibits them, a lot of them, from doing further, you know, from doing more for themselves, you know, to be self-reliant. So that's why I am addressing the caribou, the mobile zone, and that, you know, it would be nice to see this harvester support program working with the Indigenous government, you know, working with the Indigenous government based, you know, like allocate the funds based on what they say, and, you know, like based on needs or per capita would be great. Thank you.
Must see Ms. Whalen Armstrong. I think I gave you an extra one, but Minister, if you care to respond, we'll see.
Okay. I agree we need to work on this. That's why we went out and asked the Indigenous governments and the users of the program what they needed, what they think we need to do, how do we improve. We have been working, as the Deputy Minister said, we've heard some things and we started working on those things as the funding. We are waiting for the information on February 10th. This is from Indigenous users, our hunters, our Indigenous governments. It's not the government of Northwest Territories coming up with the solution. It is the people of the Northwest Territories and our hunters that are helping us develop this. And again, like we said, we will be bringing forward, hopefully this summer, the information from what we learned and how we're moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Minister. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm perplexed because we have artisans who are looking for hides with which to make items and for sale to tourists and that. And we talk about the harvester support programs. So one of the problems is that they don't have access to moose hide and caribou hide. And that's because I don't think there's an incentive to bring that out of the bush and it's left there. So I guess I'd ask the minister, is there any incentive to harvesters to bring their moose hide and caribou hide out and so it can be accessed by artisans? Thank you.
I see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
I don't know what hunters the member's talking about, but I know the hunters that I've talked to, I've heard from, they bring the hide in. They're bringing them into their communities. They do, a lot of times the families use it, and so it's very much the hides are brought in, whether it's the caribou or the moose, they bring it in. And I know in my riding, we have elders that work on this and they sell it, or they actually, one lady, two ladies that I know, do the hides and then they use that to make their slippers and their gloves and that. So in regards to for incentive to sell it to others, I will ask the Deputy Minister if we do have certain things in this program area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Nwt Art Strategy includes an action item to increase access and availability of Northwest Territories fur and hide for Nwt artists, and it's an ITI ENR co-shared action item. So we are working through programs such as CHAP and those mentorship programs that I mentioned that are new to indirectly assist by teaching people to harvest and prepare the hides, and our On the Land Funders Collaborative has provided funding to hide camps to make sure that those skills are being passed on to others. We will also work with communities to consider options for support if they approach us about a specific larger scale initiative. So if someone wants to do this in the communities and they come to our On the Land group, we can look at that as well. With respect to ITI, they have a program that buys and provides funding for hides, moose, beaver, seal, fox, muskrat, etc. So there's two different departments that are doing work on this matter. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
See, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, I have a lot of people come to my office, a lot of artisans selling goods, and a lot of those goods are made with commercially tanned hides, and I ask them all the time, why don't you use traditional tan hides? Because we can't access the hides. No, we're not. Some of the hunters or harvesters aren't bringing them out of the bush, and maybe they do it in Fort Simpson. But I get people from Providence, Simpson, all over come to me to sell stuff, and it's an issue. So what I'd like to see, I guess, is that as part of this is that we provide that we can provide an incentive for harvesters to bring the hides out if they're not, and make them available to artisans to tan. and whether we just, my preference would be just give it to them. Like you pay somebody $250, $500, I don't know what it would be, to bring them out of, to bring it out of the bush, and then turn it over to the artisan, and they can tan it. And that's kind of what I'd like to see, because there is a gap there. I know there's a gap there. You know, when you get tourists in, when they pick something up, first thing they do is smell it. They want something that's traditionally tanned. So, and if access to the hide is an issue, then we should address it. And if we have to provide some incentive, we provide incentive for everything else. So, you know, there's no reason why we can't do that. So is that something your department can look at, since you actually deal with the harvesters? Thank you.
I'll see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
Yeah, we can potentially look at this, but for clarity, I think the Deputy Minister would be able to say if we can do this fiscal year coming up and moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we'd be interested in having some conversations with folks that are interested in this through our On the Land program. To my understanding, there's the bringing it out of the bush, but the work begins when you're trying to actually tan the hide, and there are fewer and fewer people that are willing to do that work because it's very work intensive and very difficult. And that's why we've been supporting things like hide camps through the On the Land Funders Collaborative, is to make sure that those skills are still available. So we are supporting the skill development, and we're happy to have a conversation through the on the land unit, in particular with folks that you know, that are interested in that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm pleased to hear that you're willing to work with them, because what I will do is I will send the artisans over there, because what I proposed to them was that if they get the hides, that ITI then pay them to actually tan the hide, because I know how much work goes into tan a hide. Like it's not just a week's worth of work, it's longer than that. It's 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks. And it's fairly intensive, and it would provide the artisan a little extra money if they're tanning their own hides. So that's just a comment. I'd just like to move on to personnel and active positions. With the vaccine policy, I'd like to ask how many staff I guess in corporate management, I suppose at this point, were impacted by the policy. Thank you.
I'll see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
Detail, I'm going to turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm aware of 5 people who chose not to get vaccinated in the department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, can you tell me, for them to keep their positions, was it mandatory for them to have the vaccine?
I'll see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
So that's very much finance, HR issue. I know where the member is going with this, but so if there's federal requirements, i.e. getting on planes, that they need to make sure they're vaccinated, and that's a federal government. If they need to be in a company that requires it, they need to do it. And if they don't, and if they're not, don't have the vaccine, then we have set it in a policy through the federal territorial government with the Department of Finance that they follow that process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess it's safe to say that you know, if somebody's required to fly, and a requirement, the federal requirement is you have to be vaccinated, then it is mandatory to have the vaccination for that position if you want to keep it. I just want to go on here. Is how many Indigenous employees would have been impacted?
I'll see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
That detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. I don't know if we have that detail, but we'll turn to the Deputy Minister.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, and I should highlight here that I'm talking about staff that are on strength right now, as well as with the 5. I think there's one Indigenous person, but I would have to go back and check the records to be certain. I believe it's 1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. I guess we got a commitment for looking into that. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask the Minister, will there be an opportunity for those that were impacted to be either reinstated in their positions or at least have the opportunity to, I guess, reapply and be rehired when that policy falls off the table? Thank you.
Merci, Mr. Simpson. Minister.
Thank you for that detail. You're going to have to ask the Finance Minister what the policy is, what the HR policy is. I'm not going to get into that. It was a decision made by us and how we're going to move forward on this. And so we are following the Chief Public Health Officer's directions, and we are working with the federal government on how we deal with it. And for that detail of how that's being implemented, maybe save that question for the Finance Minister. Thank you.
Merci, Minister. Are there any other questions for this section? Hang on. Mr. Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. Okay. Thank you. This section, I just want to make sure, are we allowed, I know we got time limit to go through this. Is it, or do we go through page by page and then we go through 10 minutes of it, or can I get some clarification on that? Thank you.
Yeah, merci, Mr. Jericon. Yes, what we do here is we go section by section, and I'll read off the section that we're on and the page numbers that we're dealing with. So we're working through the department, but as we move along, right? So now we're on corporate management, and you'll see at the top of the page it says corporate management, and the next one would be environmental protection, which is a different section. So we're just sticking on corporate management right now. So if you can just gear all your questions within that section. So you're got 8 minutes left to go.
Thank you. Well, I've just reviewing these couple pages here, including the graphs and that in there, and then also on page 69 it talks about the activities and I guess for me what stands out as we go through this section here is that we talk about wildlife and fish. I know it's a little further down, but when I went through it, one thing I don't see is that maybe if the minister could maybe help me out so I understand with your department in terms of downstream users for fish and from the water coming down from Alberta, they say water is life, and if it's life, then we all eat the fish. So I just want to know if there's any fish studies done by your department, so that is there a report out there? I just want to throw that out to you. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe if I can just clarify, Mr. Jericon, we got wildlife and fish on page 94, so we can save that question for when we get to that section, because we're just dealing with corporate management at this time. We're on page, we're starting from 72, 73, 74, 75. Merci. Yeah.
So 72 there, the other thing is that I know last year there was in the news where there was some wasted meat that was found, and in the Dene culture, we don't like to waste meat. We harvest what we need, and that kind of thing. So I guess maybe you could help explain what insurances can you give me to see how we could prevent this from happening again? For when hunters go out there, sometimes they waste meat, etc. Like, what are we doing to put a stop to that? Thank you.
I see Mr. Jericon, Minister.
Thank you. So we do have enforcement. We have individuals that reach out to our departments, our regional offices, and we inspect it and that. But for that detail of how the process is, I'll ask the Deputy Minister, with your permission, to provide more information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have officers along the Winter Road that we're working with, and but we're also working with harvesters. So before Christmas, we had a meeting with harvesters from the different Indigenous governments to come up with ways that we could work to improve the respectfulness of harvest and to reduce waste. And then we had a leaders meeting where Minister Thompson met with his colleagues that went through what was brought forward by the harvesters at the December meeting in January. So there's some communications materials that are being developed, and there's work that has been identified for ENR to do, but also for within communities for there to be discussions related to wastage and respectful harvesting, because it's something that needs to be addressed by everyone. So there's quite a bit of work that's going on related to respectful harvesting and reducing wastage. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Masi, Mr. Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think, thank you for your answer. You also mentioned that you're also working with the local harvesters as well, I'm assuming, and if you are, and you're also working closely with the Indigenous governments as well, and to put an end to some of these activities. I guess, Mr. Chairman, I'm thinking here is that we got, this section is a really interesting section, but I just want to say that, as a former chief, when we used to go to assemblies and the minister comes in and they do their speech and we try to ask questions, and then next thing you know, time's up and they leave, but then we don't get results. So I just want to say that, it's actually an honor and privilege to sit here and question the minister and get staff, and we hear it firsthand. So I have more questions in this document that I have for the minister. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Masi, Mr. Jericon. If there are no further questions, I'll allow the minister to make a comment. Masi.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've only been the minister for the last 2 years, but I can tell you right now, we've had the opportunity to meet with Indigenous governments, Indigenous leadership, and we've had frank conversations, good communications, a lot of question and answers, and we're trying to work together collaboratively. It's the most important part of what and how I feel with the Department of ENR. We try to work with our Indigenous governments and our partners. And just for a little bit further detail, I'll ask the Deputy Minister to just give a little bit more update. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Masi, Minister, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot to mention our hunter education program that's in 9 schools, which I think is something that would also be of interest. So we've worked with ECE and converted our hunter education program that was developed with Indigenous governments, and it has been converted into a school-based program, and there's a pilot going on in 9 of the schools. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Masi, for that bit of news. That's good stuff. No further questions. Please turn to page 73. The Operations Expenditure Summary. Environment and Natural Resources Corporate Management Operations Expenditure Summary 2022-2023 main estimates $14,984,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Environmental Protection and Waste Management, beginning on page 76 with information item on page 78. And this one, for the new members' information, it ends on 78. Okay, entertain questions on this section. Okay, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You'll want to reset the clock, but I don't think I need full 10 minutes. You might be relieved to know. On this one, contaminated sites is listed as one of the program areas, and I note that in one of the very few successful Environmental Rights Act requests for an investigation, there might have been 2 only successful in about 20 years. The last one, though, was about the Ptarmigan mine, which is down the road here in Yellowknife. Quite frankly, it's a disgrace. People, tourists, have to drive by that thing all the time, and it's just a total mess. But the minister did conduct an investigation and said that work needed to be done at the site. I understand it's one of these sites under devolution. So can the minister tell me what has been done at the site? Is there money in this budget to actually do further work at the site? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Must see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
I'll just go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ptarmigan is one of the accepted waste sites in the devolution agreement, so there are still negotiations ongoing. There's been much progress that has been made lately with the federal government. We have, based on the outcomes of that investigation, committed to dust suppressant, which we're working on right now to get in place. There was fencing, some signage and fencing repair, and there's additional fencing repair that will be occurring in the spring, and we're working on a land use permit at this time. I should mention the accepted waste sites negotiations are for more sites than just Ptarmigan, and they're all being considered in those discussions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Must see Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So is there money in this budget to do work at Ptarmigan, and can we get reimbursed? And what is that amount? And can we get reimbursed for that money by the feds? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's part of the negotiations that we're having with the federal government at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To do the work I described. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Okay, for the tailings cover, the dust suppressant, stuff starts to dry out in May. Do we actually have the suppressant in stock, so to speak, and is it ready to be sprayed on or whatever in May? Because that's when the stuff starts to blow around. So, and that's something we've seen from Giant Mine for years, and the same out there. So do we have the stuff ready to go? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Yes.
Mr. O'Reilly.
It's one of the few times I think I've actually got a yes in this House, so very pleased to hear that. And I know a lot of other Yellowknife residents and others will be quite happy with that. So, so in the description of the activities carried out under what the purpose of this section of ENR is, there's words around prevention. Is there any policy work that this section of ENR is going to do this year? The only thing in 6 years that I've seen here is was about a 10 or 12 page document about some kind of vague GNWT policy around contaminated sites. Is there any other policy work, legislative changes, anything at all that is going to help prevent messes like Ptarmigan Mine from happening again and again and again? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is an approach to contaminated sites document that we have, and we have an ADM working group because this is a multi-departmental initiative. which we've shared with committee. There's a GNWT Contaminated Sites Management Work Plan that has a number of policy-based items that folks are working on at multiple departments, and we're on track with that work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think I may have seen the document, but can the minister commit to share it with standing committee and report regularly on progress on that initiative? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Yeah, we'll make a commitment to get the report to committee. And as for progress, we will have to discuss with committee what he means by progress and what timelines that the committee's looking for. Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it annually as we move forward? So before I make a commitment on that, I'd like to get some clarity from committee on that. Thank you.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm a very patient man. I've been waiting 6 years, so any kind of progress reporting would be really helpful, but I'll leave it at that. That's all my questions in this activity. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask a bit of a question for more detail on the dust suppressant that the Deputy Minister mentioned. I'm just curious to know, is this for the tailings that's adjacent to the roadway, and which type of dust suppressant are they looking at? Thank you.
I see Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
Detail, I'm going to the Deputy Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is the tailings that are near the roadway, and I'm sorry, but even I do not have that level of technical detail in this binder right now. We can certainly get back to folks if the minister is okay with that, with the type of dust suppressant. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm a bit of a nerd from my time at Giant Mine, which is why I'm curious to know what's being explored for Ptarmigan, and do urge the department and the minister to chat with the Giant Mine folks about their issues in spreading dust suppressant throughout the windy conditions of the Northwest Territories. And I see a nod, so I'll just take that as a comment. I guess my question is around, again with Ptarmigan, and I appreciate my colleague raising it. With the land use permit work being done underway, is it, and while we're still negotiating within the accepted waste sites under devolution, can we still continue to progress on with the remediation work there? And I guess it is a little bit the similar question to what Member O'Reilly was asking, but will the process delay remediation work as we go through the Devo process, or can we continue to advance during that time? Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
Thank you. We'll get the dust suppressant information to her. In regards to that detail, I want to say yes, but I'm going to turn to the Deputy Minister to get clarity on what the process is moving forward. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what's being negotiated right now. Clearly, we're doing the work on the land use permits, and we're hopeful that we can come to an agreement, and it's looking positive for us to continue with the work, but that is the crux of the negotiations that are occurring at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Without incriminating myself, I may have had a time or an opportunity to have looked around the Ptarmigan mine, despite some no trespassing signs there. So I'm just curious to know if we're verging onto somewhat of an emergent situation at Ptarmigan. I know that there are issues with a head frame and probably likely stability and such of some of the buildings. I'm not sure if there is an open raise or shaft there. I see my colleague nodding his head yes. So what point would we get to where it becomes a hazard to the point where we have to do something ahead of that agreement being reached? And is there a process for us to do so? Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
Detailed Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Even though the negotiations are ongoing to determine who's ultimately responsible for those sites, the GNWT put up fencing quite some time ago. There's boulders, there's signs, getting people to not go on the site, which is an attempt to address some of the concerns that have been put forward. So until we know who's ultimately responsible, we're trying to keep people off of the site so that those things are not addressed. Clearly, we need to determine who's responsible so that we can move forward, and that's what we're working hard on at this point. And I can honestly say that there have been conversations recently at the deputy level trying to move this, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to make progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to say that I was on the site long before all the signs went up in the fencing. Just looked really neat, so we wandered off the highway. And I guess my final question on that then is, are we on the hook then as the GNWT for that in the meantime? Is there, and I know again, I'm probably just reiterating Mr. O'Reilly, but I maybe was not always listening to the answer. So, are we able to recoup that at some point? Thank you. I'll just ask again.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister?
For that detail, Deputy Minister, thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is the crux of the negotiations that we're having right now, is who is responsible for paying for the remediation of those sites, not just Ptarmigan, the suite of accepted sites. And that's all I can really comment on at that time because the work is ongoing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Merci. Ms. Knockleby?
I just want to say I appreciate the Minister and Deputy Minister's patience as you can understand that from this side we definitely want you to be asking for that money to be paid for by the federal government, regardless, if we do end up doing the remediation work ourselves. Some of it seems like it's their stalling that has led the mine to get to that state for so long, so I feel like we should hold them accountable. And again, just a comment, so thank you.
Merci. No other questions from committee? Oops. Here we got a couple. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm in the right spot here, hopefully. Environmental stewardship and climate change? No. Oh, sorry, I think it's the next one.
We're on environmental protection.
And waste management. Goes up to page 78. You're good? Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Jericon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for the Minister. Since devolution, it's my understanding that the contaminated sites, did the GNWT take responsibility of the contaminated sites, or is it, my understanding it's still the responsibility of Government Canada?
All right, Mussy. Yeah, maybe just to remind committee if we can indicate that you're done with your question by saying, Minister?
Thank you. So those 6 sites are part of the negotiations. We didn't take them over from devolution, but for further detail, maybe I'm wrong, so maybe I'll look at the Deputy Minister. She just touched her brow, so I think I might have said the wrong thing. So get the clarity, I'll go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are still federal sites that are on federal land. There's some that we're negotiating. There's some that the federal government is remediating and then they're asking us to take back, and we need to do the work to figure out if we want to accept those or not. And there's some that are GNWT sites that were contaminated sites before devolution and they remain ours. So there's multiple ways, but there are still federal contaminated sites that are the responsibility of the federal government. There's some that we're negotiating here that are called accepted waste sites. There's some that we agreed that they would remediate and give back to us, and then there's some that were ours to begin with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see, Mr. Jericon.
Thank you for your answer. Also, can you tell me exactly how many contaminated sites are there we're looking at here? I'm assuming you guys did the study that for the Northwest Territories. The questions to the Minister are with. Thank you.
I'll see Mr. Jericon. Minister?
For that detail, I'll turn to the the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were 1,319 sites that were transferred to the GNWT through devolution. An additional 99 sites will be transferred to the GNWT once the Government of Canada has completed the remediation work to the GNWT's satisfaction. A further 20 sites are being negotiated with the Government of Canada regarding responsibility. And I've already mentioned the different categories of the sites. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Jericon.
Thank you for that. Now that you told me those numbers on that, has your department, or to the minister, has your department gone out to figure out the actual cost to remediate these mine sites in a broad number? So we don't know. I don't see any numbers here, but I'm asking that question to you. Thank you.
Merci. Mr. Jericon, since you're kind of new, direct all your questions to the chair. And then when you're done your question, if you can just indicate that you are done by saying thank you or recognizing the chair. Merci. We'll move along. Minister.
Thank you. So before I put my foot in my mouth, as when the member was asking the question, I thought we were just talking about the 6 sites and not the whole gamut. But for that detail, I'm going to turn to the Deputy Minister. She has the numbers, I believe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to be clear, these are not all mine sites. Some of these are just small sites on the landscape. And the GNWT uses a risk management approach, and we work with finance and other departments on that. And there is a liabilities fund that can fund some of the remediation, but the decisions on what will be remediated, are dependent on the level of risk. So we prioritize high priority sites to action with the funding that we do have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that clarification earlier, because I was the chairman for the Impact Review Board, and I've been through that as well. So, thank you. Another question to Mr. Chairman is that now that I guess I want to know how's the department working with the remediation portion of it once they identify this and to figure out the costs and that. How's that work going to be going let out? Is it going to be done through contracts, or can that be done through working with Indigenous governments and that kind of thing? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Merci, Mr. Jericon. Minister.
So, depending on the projects, we were working with a variety of options, and again, it depends on what project we're talking about and how we're doing it with it. We do have conversations with various organizations and governments moving forward on it. So again, until we have specific sites that you're talking about, we look at the whole gamut moving forward. There's a number of options available to us. But I really need to stress, if we can work with Indigenous governments as best we can, we do that there. So, but for further detail, I'll ask the Deputy Minister to add to this. Thank you.
Merci, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we use GNWT procurement policies for the GNWT remediation work that is ongoing. So there's the BIP policy. I think we're doing a lot of work these days on the remediation economy with our fellow departments of Finance, ITI, and ECE, looking at opportunities for remediation economy for Northern and Northern Indigenous businesses. And there's been a bunch of work that's been done through Giant Mine that we're learning from as well, related to Indigenous involvement in Indigenous businesses and also Northern businesses in that remediation project, which is very large. So there's a number of different things that are going on to work with Indigenous governments related to the remediation economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess during your investigation and trying to determine the type or magnitude of reclamation you guys are looking at, I guess I'm wondering, once you guys determine, say, Ptarmigan Mine, If that used to be a gold mine, and I'm assuming that there's probably tailings, et cetera, and similar to the giant mine. I just want to know if at what point do we say that this here needs to go to environmental assessment? Because to me, when you start reclamation, it is a big project, and I just want to put that out there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I see Mr. Jericon. Minister?
Detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
We would apply for, thank you, Mr. Chair. We would apply for, maybe I'll just take it back a step further. So we would do work, and we would do a human health and environment risk assessment and a remedial action plan that would outline what we would do for the site to get it to the conditions that are agreed upon. And then we would get a land use permit, and during that land use permit, it would be screened. And if it was necessary, then an EA would be called. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Jericon?
Concludes my questions. Thank you.
Merci. Any further questions from committee on this section? Ms. Whelan Armstrong.
I see here in the budget it says the actuals from 395. The main estimates was different, and it went down. So so for the main estimate for this upcoming fiscal year is lower. What happened there? Why is that?
I see Ms. Whelan Armstrong. Minister?
For that detail, I'll just turn to the Deputy Minister. Yeah, because there's a number of avenues and other lines there that, yeah, I'll just turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It went up 8,000 from the 2021-22 revised main estimates to 2022-23 main estimates, and that's due to collective bargaining. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Whelan Armstrong?
With respect to this contaminated site, so how many communities are you guys working with at the moment?
I see Ms. Whelan Armstrong. Minister?
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're working with the communities that are located close to the contaminated sites that we're working on. I don't have the exact number in front of me at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Whelan Armstrong?
That's good. Thank you.
All right, committee. Let's see what happened here. Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, now that I know which section we're on. Contaminated sites, I'd just like to ask about strategic oil and gas and what's happening with that, and where the department is if we're looking at remediation. If the minister could respond to that. Thank you.
I see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
Thank you. That's very much a lands question, but I can give you that since I'm wearing the lands hat there right now. It's still in receivership. It's still in the court system right now. So we're not doing anything with it right now. Do we have a plan in place at any point in time? We are working on our plan presently. So yeah, that's about all I can say right now. Thank you.
Merci. Mr. Simpson?
That's all. Thank you.
Merci. There are no further questions on this section. Please turn to page 77. Environment and Natural Resources, Environmental Protection and Waste Management, Operation Expenditure Summary, 2022 to 2023 main estimates, $4,333,000. Does the committee agree? Agreed. Thank you. Environmental Stewardship and Climate Change, beginning on page 79, with information item on page 82. Questions? Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 81, just looking at adaptation plan and climate change community adaptation, and we're looking at roughly 378,000 combined there. And I'm just wondering here, because I guess when I look at what we're talking about or what we're trying to achieve with this, we look at, it takes into account sharing of information, investing in infrastructure, looking at that, setting building codes to ensure that, buildings are not going to get damaged, addressing possible health effects, supporting regions that are vulnerable to climate change, maintaining our ecosystems, in the regions, and also the environment. And we've went through years of forest fires. Now we're going through years of flooding, and what's next? Will it be tornadoes, high winds? We don't know. So, we're only looking at at that 378,000. I'm just wondering if that's enough money, or is the government looking at maybe putting some more money into it, considering what's happened over the last few years with flooding and fires? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. Simpson. Minister?
Sorry. Thank you very much. Right now, we feel this is the money that we need to move forward, but my deputy minister put her head up, so I should look at her and get her to clarify that. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's important to note that for things like climate change adaptation, this is just for the coordination and planning element, but there's climate change adaptation work that's being done in all of these sections, right? For wildlife, for water, for all of these different things, and also at different departments. So MACA and infrastructure are also doing adaptation work. The reason this looks a little funny here is because some of the projects that were planned for 2020, 2021 were unable to be completed because of COVID. The project itself. Sometimes it's because the communities we were not able to do the work with the communities at that time. We're always looking for funding from the federal government, and they do provide it, but not always in this line item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Simpson.
Questions? Thank you.
Any further questions from committee? Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can the Minister of the Department comment on how the climate workers, I guess for lack of a better word, sorry, brain dead, how their work interacts with the other departments and how they are working to help inform? You've got the expertise in your department, and I know that it needs to be interconnected to others, such as that infrastructure where maybe they only have one of those types of employees. So yes, how can the Minister speak a little bit to that interaction and how they help, and if they need more resources in order to help inform other departments? Thank you.
I see Ms. Knockleby. There's a climate workers question. Mr. Minister?
Well, I'm going to go to the Deputy Minister on that one. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are interdepartmental coordinating committees at all levels. So there's a Directors of Climate Change, ADM, Deputy of and Ministerial Committee of Cabinet. We work very closely with other departments, many other departments. We just a year ago got additional positions to help other departments build their capacity as well as our own to do some of the climate change work. And then an added element where we work together is that decision items that are going through need to factor in climate change, and our folks at ENR support other departments to do that assessment that's included in that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, does the department anticipate that maybe needs to change or evolve, or do they see that as working going forward? I guess sometimes I get a little bit concerned that there's a lot of, whereas we do want to break down the silos, but there's a lot of times where I hear ADMs or the deputy ministers are having all these committees, and then it makes me wonder if they're just having a lot of committee meetings and maybe they're being overwhelmed in that, and maybe the right people aren't. So I guess I'm just curious to know if there's a way that we could move this forward efficiently so we're not looking back later on trying to change it like we are so many other departments of the GNWT. Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister?
For that detail, Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think our department has quite a lot of experience working on files that are cross-departmental, and so we're not just sitting, like, it's not just at the ADM level, it's at the working level all the way through, so there is that ability for consistency and things to go up and come down within those groups, which is really great. I mean, I don't think you can find a file where that is more where there's more of a requirement for departments to work together than climate change. It affects all of the departments, and there needs to be that working together. And I think that we're doing that effectively at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockaby.
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Let me get this here. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I just want to start by saying that although I ask a lot of tough questions of this department, I do appreciate the work that the staff do, and I know that they're always doing their best. But I do have some questions around climate change and conservation area planning and management over a longer period of time. The Nature Fund protected areas, grants and contributions is going down on page 81. It's about, I don't know, almost $300,000 less this year than last year. When I look at conservation planning and implementation program detail on page 80, it's about $1.5 million less than what was spent last year. I guess, so where are we going to find the money to maintain the long-term investment that's needed to fund these protected areas? And I support them, and they will create sustainable long-term jobs that have lots of other benefits. But where's the money going to come from? Because we're not spending it, and this is not a good trend in this budget. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Thank you. I'll start and then turn to the Deputy Minister. ENR has been exploring potential opportunities to fund territorial protected areas over the long term, and at the same time support economic diversification in NWT. One option is the Project Finance for Permanence, or PFP. PFPs are relative new financial tools that bring together diverse partners, including governments, donors, into a single group with a common purpose. Currently, ENR is representing the GNWT in discussions on the feasibility of PFP for the NWT. But for further detail, I will turn to the Deputy Minister, because we have started the conversations and that, but I'll turn to the Deputy Minister for further information. Thank you.
Merci, and if somebody could clarify what was PFP also at the same time. Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Nature Fund fluctuates based on the activities that were planned. So what you see in here is the amount of money that we said we would need for the years that we had it. And the reason that the costs or the funding decreased over time is we were shifting from negotiations, which are expensive because you need to meet and have those meetings, to some of the management and operations pieces, right? So that is part of this change. With respect to long-term funding, we're live to that issue and have been working and talking to funders and also to the federal government for many years, but the Project Financing for Permanence option, PFP, is a recent thing that's come up that we're looking at with other departments in the GNWT to see if it could be something that could work for all of us. And it's we're working with Indigenous governments and others, the funders themselves on that to see if it could work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I guess, I know I've said this before, I understand a lot of work that has to go into the negotiation of setting these protected areas up, but that's when the real work actually begins. You have to create management plans, you know, you have to, there should be money for guardianship programs, investing in tourism and infrastructure in the protected areas themselves. I actually disagree with what the minister or the deputy minister said in that I think you need even more money when it comes to actually implementing these and doing it in a consistent and supportive way. So that's what I'm most worried about, is where's the money going to come from to do that? And it does require a sustained investment from our government. So I'm just going to leave it at that on this topic, Mr. Chair, but I want to turn now to the climate crisis. And I'm looking at a document. This is from a different department, but it was part of this consolidated climate change reporting from GNWT. You know, this government, and ENR has the lead apparently on the climate change, climate crisis. And so this is a document from the Department of Infrastructure that actually calculates what the greenhouse gas emission reductions have been and predicts what they're going to be by 2025. So that's 7 years into the agreement that we signed on to, the Pan-Canadian Framework, to reduce our emissions by a certain amount. We will, by 2025, we will have only reached 20% of the target. And that leaves, you know, another 5 years to do the 80%. Like I said at the time, this was not a good strategy. We back-end loaded it, and my predictions are coming completely true. We're going to fail to meet that target unless we change course now. So I want to ask the minister, as the lead on the climate crisis, what are we going to do to change the trajectory of this government, this Northwest Territories, to actually meet the Pan-Canadian Framework target? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. So, as the member has said, this is very much infrastructure, and that's part of it. As the lead, we work with the departments, but for detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister to explain how we are working collaboratively together on this very topic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Minister?
Chair, so the GNWT working together is aware of, in particular, the timelines associated with Tulston and whether that it'll be on, be able to be in effect before the target time frame. And because of that, we're working with other departments, including infrastructure, for mitigation pathways for the next energy action plan. They're the lead on the energy action plan, but ENR is part of those discussions as well as some of the other departments. So there is work being done to look at other ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So can we get any details on what the Plan B is? Is that something that the minister can share with standing committee and maybe even the public? Because Plan A from the last assembly is not going to do it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Yeah, that there, I would ask the member to ask questions on that with the infrastructure minister, what Plan B is, because I don't have what Plan B is in front of me, but maybe the deputy minister may have further clarity on how we move forward on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to speak for another department, but my understanding is that infrastructure will do engagement on their next plan. That would be part of the work, and that there needs to be, they're working on their next energy strategy action plan, and they would engage on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Mr. Chair, just more of a comment, I think, at this point. This is symptomatic of what I've said about this government's approach to climate change, the climate crisis, all along. It's divided up amongst 3 ministries. No one seems to want to take responsibility for an overall coordinated approach. ENR is supposed to have the lead, but doesn't really. And I don't detect any changes from what happened in the last assembly, the last cabinet's approach. It's failing. The stats show that, and we're not going to reach the Pan-Canadian Framework. So another plea to change course, please, to try to save the planet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have on this activity.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister, you have any comments on that? None at all. Committee, any further? Whoops, stop that clock there. No, if there are no further questions, we can turn to page 80. Environment and Natural Resources, Environmental Stewardship and Climate Change, Operations Expenditure Summary, 2022-2023 main estimates, $14,270,000. Does the committee agree? Agreed. Thank you. We'll move on to forest management, beginning on page 83. With information item on page 86. Any questions? Forest management. No questions? Whoops, stop. We got Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see there's about $30 million for forest firefighting and forest suppression here. I know the last couple of years, largely due to COVID, we have taken a bit of a preemptive pre-suppression method, which costs us a little more, but one of the benefits is that we have less risk of, intermingling crowds and requiring maybe southern firefighters should there be a bad season. Can I just have the minister speak to whether we are doing a similar approach this year, or what our approach to fire suppression is going into this year? Thank you.
I see Mr. Johnson. Minister.
So we are looking at this very topic right now. What we are seeing presently with the variants out there is that we may be doing the same approach moving forward, but we need to look at that and confirm it. But for details, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister if she has anything else to add. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There needs to be some internal discussions with the CPHO to get some advice, and we'll make decisions based on that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that method costs us quite a bit more, and I know that a bad forest fire season usually means a SUP, and it costs us quite a bit more than $30 million. I believe due to COVID, we've kind of been, and increased tanker costs, running well above the average for a couple of years now, and I believe there's some sort of formula of when we readjust these numbers. Can I just have the minister speak to whether we anticipate having to, budget more than $30 million going forward to forest fires, given the kind of 5-year average of increased costs? Thank you.
I see Mr. Johnson. Minister.
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the actuals for the last couple of years were 14.696 million and 19.892 million. So they're not out of whack, that different than what we are on average. One of the concerns with the approach that we have been using is that from an ecosystem perspective, it's important that we let fires burn in some, so that we don't end up with a landscape that isn't a patchwork, where there's consistent fire across, because then we get fires that can move large distances, right? So there's a balance here that we need to achieve with making sure that we're adjusting for current conditions, but also with making sure that there's an opportunity for us to have a natural fire regime on the landscape. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm wondering what work the department does to kind of look to whether we are spending too much on forest fires. I guess I want to start by saying I think these are some of the best jobs in the whole territory. I have no issue with the $13 million in compensation and benefits here. A lot of good experience and good training comes out of forestry firefighting. But there is $18 million in contract services here. I imagine the vast majority of that is our tanker contract and our helicopter contract, but in past years, in a bad fire season, ENR has essentially not used that, or it's kind of scrambles to find ways to creatively use helicopters because we pay no matter what under the contract. Can I just have the minister speak to whether we've reviewed these contracts for possible cost savings? $18 million every single year is a lot of money. Thank you.
I see Mr. Johnson. Minister?
Yeah, so what I can tell you is that we look at it every year. We look at it at the beginning of the year, we look at it at the end of the year, and right now is where we see what's available. One of the things is that what members need to understand is because of the fire season and that, if we don't have the helicopters in the communities or the tankers in the community or the staff in the communities and we don't have contracts, we pay more and we pay big bucks in that. So right now we feel good with what we're budgeting, but there is a process, and I will turn to the Deputy Minister for clarity on the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think if the forest management people were here today, they would say that they're doing this on a very small budget for the size of our territory, and that we actually have to move our folks around when there's fires in different regions because we don't have we're not wasting. We don't have them in every single regional center. I think it's important to recognize that a lot of these contracts are for the 802s and the Electras as well as for flights. And in the past couple of years, we've had to increase those because there's been fewer flights, so we have fewer eyes in the sky. So we've needed to actually go out and look to see and do reconnaissance to see if there's fires burning more so than we have in the past, right? The compensation and benefits, we work really closely with Indigenous businesses that provide Indigenous people to fight fires for us. And I think that we're doing this on the smallest budget that we possibly can. One of the concerns that came up last year that's really important to understand is if you don't have them on contract and there's fires in the south, they'll be down south working the fires and we won't have them up here to fight our fires. Now, when we don't have a big fire year, of course we look across the government to see if there's any people who need to use the helicopter time for GNWT work so that we can maximize the contracts that we do have in place. But often that is not, that's not available because we're using them all the time for fires. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
No, I already.
We're on.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair, I just lost my focus for a minute. Yes, I have a couple questions I'd like to pursue here. I see that wildfire risk management plans, that there was $275,000 spent last year, and only 75 budgeted for this year. So where did the extra money come from to do the plans last year, and why are we not continuing that level of funding forward to help protect communities? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly, Minister.
So this is application based, so the communities apply for it. When we have more applications, we try to find the money within, but for how we do the processing, how we do the budgeting, I will turn to the Deputy Minister to get her to explain the process to the member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do, as the Minister said, on a regular basis. In this instance, it's because through the supplementary funding that we got related to fighting fires in a COVID situation, there was some extra money to do some fire smarting work with communities, and that's why you can see this difference on that line item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I think the risk of fires is only going to increase with the climate crisis. So if there's more applications for funding, the department will find the money to get the work done. Is that what I'm hearing the minister say? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
So when we get the applications, we try to find and be able to work with the existing resources that we have presently, and we try to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess if I hear that communities are not getting the money, I'll come back to the minister to raise that. But the other question I have is, I had a constituent raise with me the issue of being able to cut wood along the Clecho All-Season Road, and apparently was not able to get a wood cutting permit. What is going on with wood cutting along the road, and why wasn't that sorted out before the road was opened? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. So the road project got done quicker. We have 0 to 12 when we're working with the Clecho government. We are trying to work with the Clecho government to set up a plan. We are in a process of working with them. And so we are working with the Clecho government. They've identified issues and concerns. And so right now we have 0 to 12, and that's what we're working with the Clecho government for the people to get permits to go through that process. The other part of the road, and I don't know the exact mileage of it, but it's from 13 to the end of the road. We are working with the Clecho government. They have concerns, and we're going through a process with their committee and our staff moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, okay, thanks. This is all coming as news to me, so just so I can get this clarified. So the first, from the junction to kilometer 12, ENR is issuing wood cutting permits to anybody, any residents, and then beyond kilometer 12, that's still under negotiation with the Clecho government. Is that what I hear the minister say? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
Just to get clarity, I'm going to turn to the Deputy Minister, but it's 0 to 12 is where the cutting permits existed prior to the road. That's where the people were able to do it. But to get clarity on it, and it's not negotiations. I want to get it clear. We're working with the Clecho government on their traditional territory and public lands. We are working with them. It's not negotiating. So I need to stress we are working with them together collaboratively to come up with a process that's respectful of them in their Indigenous area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For your permission, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister to give clarity on the permits and stuff like that. Thank you.
Merci. Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So ENR has been meeting with the Clecho government to discuss the concerns as the minister mentioned. And what we're trying to do is come up with an interim plan while we work with the Clecho government on a forest management plan for the area. What we're interested in and working on right now is what will happen for those for kilometers 0 to 5 and 8 to 12, which previously there were permits in that area. And my understanding is we're almost there with those discussions. So at this time, they're still ongoing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'll make a couple of suggestions. Can I get a commitment then out of the minister to give us a briefing note on this? Because I've heard different ranges of kilometers, and if that briefing note could clarify land ownership and who's responsible for forest resources along the corridor of the road. The last thing I want to do is interfere with the Clecho agreement in any way in their rights. And then so can I get that commitment out of the minister? And secondly, can you commit to actually communicate this with the public? Because it's been radio silence with the public in terms of what's going on. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
We can give a commitment to what the process is and how we're doing it. But for communications, before I make that commitment, I would like to get the Deputy Minister to explain what's going on. It hasn't been radio silence from my point of view. Maybe there is been some challenges, and maybe it's just the information that I've been receiving. and maybe it's because I've been talking with the Clecho government on this very topic. So with your permission, I'll go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Masi, I think he asked for clarification also on the permitting process to Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no harvesting along the road at this point, and we're working with the Clecho government to come up with the plan. Once we have the plan, we will communicate it out, but that's what we're working on getting at this point. There is a structure, there's a cabin on between 5 and 8, and the reason the numbers were different, we are looking at 0 to 12, but there would be a buffer around that cabin, and that's what we're looking at. That's why I said 0 to 5 and 8 to 12. So this is still under discussion, and we will definitely communicate it out once the plan is in place and once we've finalized our discussions with the Clecho government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Masi. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Nothing further.
Not seeing any further questions for this section. Please turn to page 84. Environment and Natural Resources, Forest Management Operations Expenditure Summary 2022-2023 main estimates, $39,096,000. Does the committee agree? Agreed. We're getting close to our hard stop at 6 o'clock. I'm not sure we want to entertain another section. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that the Chair rise and report progress.
Okay, the motion is in order. The motion is non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress. Must see.
May I have the report of Committee of the Whole? Member for Decho.
Madam Speaker, your committee has been considering Bills 23, 29, and 38 tabled document 561-19, brackets 2, and would like to report progress. And Madam Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Merci.
Do I have a seconder? Member for Bootlegg. All those in favor? Motion carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Orders of the day. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Orders of the day for Thursday, February 24th, 2022, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, replies to the budget address, day 3 of 7, acknowledgements, oral questions, return to written questions, replies to commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, bills 23, 29, and 38, table document 561, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, February 24th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.
Order.